Hey everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for helping me reach 100 subscribers. I honestly couldn't have done this without your love, support, and constant encouragement. Every like, comment, and subscribe means a lot to me. Now let's keep this journey going. Our next target is 200 subscribers, and I know we can do it together. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's grow as a family. Thank you once again. When Luffy vanishes inside ancient ruins, the Straw Hats are pulled into a terrifying journey through his past. Trapped within Luffy's memories, the crew witnesses moments of brotherhood with Ace and Sabo, childhood pain, and scars Luffy never shared. As past and present blur, the Straw Hats must confront truths that were never meant for them to see, learning what truly shaped their captain. To escape, they must not only find Luffy, but also come to terms with the weight of the memories he carried alone. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. Respect to author.
Chapter 41, Halfway There, Reaching the Red Line. Chapter 40, Halfway There, Reaching the Red Line. They all stared long and hard at Ace, who continued to have that same sad look, clearly waiting for them to give him an answer. Just let me get this straight, Nami stuttered slightly as she stepped forward. You want us to see the rest of Luffy's memories here because you think that it'll help him. Ace closed his eyes. To be honest, I can't say for sure if it will solve anything, he confessed. Even if you see everything, who's to say that it will help? But if there's the slightest chance that it could help him, if you could know everything and help him realize that he had done everything he could, would that be enough? They glanced at each other, not sure of what to do. Ace sighed as he turned and began to walk away. I'll leave it up to you, he commented. In either case, I promise you'll have Luffy back by sunrise. All you have to do is jump if you want to see any more. Hey, wait, Usopp yelled, but then darkness clouded over and they all ended up blacking out. Though they blinked, and suddenly they were looking up at seaweed right above them, and they all sat right up when they looked around, half expecting to see Ace there again. But no, they were inside the ruins once more. The giant hole was back as well, looking just like it had been before. Wait, did all of that really happen? Nami gasped, holding on to the brief hope that maybe it had all just been a dream. I remember everything though, Robin commented, and they shared with each other what they had seen and heard, before they all realized that they had the exact same dream. So, the questions remaining are, was that truly Ace with Saw? Zoro said, and do we jump down there and visit more memories? No one seemed willing to answer him. Brook looked at his skeletal hand and said, I could feel Ace Sand's hand. He said quietly, I believe that he was real. If what he said was true, that would explain how we were able to see him again, Robin said, her head raised up as she continued to think about his words. I want to help Luffy. Chopper said firmly, before he added a little more meekly, but I don't want to see any more. But Ace wants us too, Frankie pointed out, and I don't know about you all, but it's been killing me to know what happened. So we view more of Luffy's memories without him knowing about it just because we're curious. Nami demanded angrily. I didn't mean it like that, sis, Frankie said, holding up his hands defensively. I say we just wait here for Luffy to come back. Usopp said firmly. Ace said that Luffy'd be back in the morning, right? And with that thing now gone, all we have to do is wait here for him. But if we can help, Luffy, Sanji offered in confusion. As they argued, Zoro paced the floor, trying to figure out what to do. Now he knew what it felt like to hide secrets from the crew that you didn't want known. If it were him, he'd never want anyone to see into his own private memories. But Luffy's carrying a burden so heavy that I'm amazed that he can carry it all by himself. But you think that you can help him bear that weight? He had carried that weight once before back at Thriller Bark, and that weight had almost killed him. Was the burden that Ace was talking about just that painful for him? He didn't know what to do. It'd be easier if he could ask Luffy if it was alright, though he knew that Luffy would never agree to this idea. What about you? Said a voice, and he looked up to see that Robin had come over to speak with him as the others continued with their loud argument. What do you want to do? Zoro didn't answer for a moment as his eye looked at the hole again, and he sighed. I want to know, but at the same time, I respect that it's his decision. They are his private memories. I know that I wouldn't want anyone to watch what's inside my head. But we've already seen most of them, Robin pointed out as her eyes saddened. Though I agree that they are his memories and we shouldn't try to pry. Out of everyone here, you're the most guarded when it comes to your past, Zoro said, watching her out of the corner of his good eye. You never ask us about our pasts, so we never ask you about yours. She didn't say anything to that. She merely looked at him. He sighed as he went on, I think that everyone's like that. We all carry a lot of weight by our pasts alone. That's not completely true though, Robin answered. After all, I just don't think that Luffy cares what happens in our histories. They don't matter to him, all that he cares about is who we are now. But if he's really suffering as much as Ace said he was, you think that we would look, Zoro said, a part of him wanting to know what happened, but the other half too scared to know. They looked at each other, wishing that they could have an easy answer on what to do. Whatever you chose, I'll follow, she said at long last, and he glanced at her. You know Luffy better than any of us. You made a choice very similar to this one before. If you think that this will help Luffy out in a long run, I'll support that. Zoro looked at her for a moment longer before he looked back to the hole, his mind split. Was it possible that Luffy was suffering more than any of them realized? Could they help him? Luffy didn't seem like he bore any lasting scars from what happened at Marineford, at least none that they couldn't already see already. Would Luffy understand? After seeing how well he took even after hearing the flag get stolen made him second guess it. But, we already owe him several apologies, he said at last, might as well go all the way. She smiled as she stepped forward to tell the others. Sanji was all up for whatever she said, and it all broke into several arguments as Zoro sighed and looked at the hole in the ground. Luffy, I hope that you can forgive for this, he thought grimly, and without a backwards look, he jumped down. Zoro. Nami cried as he disappeared, feeling a sense of deja vu going through her as he disappeared from her sights. You can't be serious about this. Usopp cried out. Blame it on Ace when Luffy gets back, Robin offered, he was the one who wanted it. Listen, Ace was Luffy's big brother. Those two were as close as it was possible to get. Ace was very protective of his little brother, and likewise, Luffy was just as protective of Ace. This kind of love was so great that he apparently embarked on a one-man rescue mission to free Ace from Impel Down. He then went to Marineford and fought on every single marine, including the admirals and even warlords, for a chance to save him. While I think that Luffy has learned to accept Ace's death, Ace really believes that this is for the best. He owes him, and this is like his last wish, isn't it? So, shouldn't we want to help? They all looked at her uncomfortably, none of them happy about this, but one by one, they slowly nodded. Robin fought her own feelings of guilt as she jumped and fell down the steep hole, with the others behind her. They floated down like a leaf in a breeze, remembering the sensation well from the first time they came to his place. She couldn't help herself but glance around, half expecting the parasite to come out and attack them. But there wasn't anything down here except for darkness. Downwards she fell, and at the bottom, she could see Zoro there, standing there waiting for them all. She landed as gracefully as a crane would step and glanced around as Zoro said, "Can't believe we ended up in this place twice in one night. This has certainly been the longest night I've ever had." Robin nodded grimly. "But hopefully this will all be over soon enough." Famous last words, he answered back. "Robin, my love," called a familiar voice above them, and they glanced up to see Sanji falling towards them, heart back in his eyes as he saw her. "I'm so glad that you're safe." "Nothing happened yet, moron," Zoro called in annoyance. "You can rot in hell, moss head." He yelled back. "Please, shut up," Nami hollered as she also appeared, and Sanji dramatically held out his arms to try and catch her, but instead, she ended up stepping onto his head, knocking him to the ground and landing lightly on her feet. Sanji didn't seem to mind though as he lay there, an expression of pure bliss on his face as the others came down one by one, with Usopp sticking close to Frankie and Chopper hanging onto Brook so tightly that Brook was complaining that his muscles were cramping up. "Not that I have muscles, yo-ho-ho-ho," he added happily. "I can't believe we came back to a spooky place like this," Usopp whispered tearfully, he and Chopper hugging each other as they looked around at the crushing darkness around them. Why couldn't Ace just give Luffy back and we could leave?" "Don't be so selfish," Frankie said, sniffling a little as he remembered the touching memories of the two brothers when they were kids. "They deserve it. Just for a little while, let them have time to hang out. I think that we owe it to them to have that much." Usopp didn't want to argue with that, but he was scared to the core of being down here again. He wanted nothing more than to just turn tail and escape back to the sunny. But he did his best to grit his teeth and bear it. "I know," he whimpered, "but, let's hurry and get this over with. The sooner that we deal with this, the sooner we can leave, right?" "That's the spirit," Brook said cheerfully as he strummed the guitar. "How about we sing a song? Yo-ho-ho-ho. That always cheers me up." But he was spared the chance to sing as a new memory appeared, and they were back on the sunny, only not the one that they wanted. "I'm starting to get used to all this," Nami sighed as she walked over to the side of the ship, and her hand went right through the wood. "That bothers me. I just hope we don't regret this," Usopp whispered to himself, feeling a little better at the bright, sunny day they were watching. The memory crew were all on the deck, with Luffy, Chopper, Usopp, and Brook were sitting on the railing and were trying to fish as the others lay on the deck having some tea, or in Zoro's case, catching up on his sleep. "Ah, this is so boring," Luffy whined out with a pout. "Well, let us be patient," Memory Brook offered, patient as always. But instead, Luffy leaned his head back and whined at Nami, asking if they were at Fishman Island yet. I swear, he's such a baby sometimes. Current Nami sighed as her past self put her teacup down onto its saucer a little harder than necessary as she snapped at him to shut up and that she had already told him that they were getting close. At those words, Memory Sanji was dreaming of the mermaids and twirling around happily as Zoro gave him a look of disgust as he went back to sleep. Oh, the mermaids of Fishman Island are truly the all blue of my heart.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Present-day Sanji sighed happily. The little puffs of smoke were taking the forms of little hearts before they disappeared into the sky. The paradise I'd dreamt of since I was young had finally come true. What I want to know is what happened to you in these last 2 years to make you even weaker against women, Usopp asked him, thinking of his near-death experiences by Nosebleed. At his question, Sanji's face was suddenly replaced by a very ugly look. A dark cloud was hanging over his head and Usopp cowered at the crazed glint in Sanji's eyes. I'm sorry I asked, he croaked at the sight of sheer torment on Sanji's face. Damn, had he really been in hell? He looked as if he'd seen the devil himself. Don't question things you don't understand, Sanji said in a zombie-like voice. Not the kind of zombies back at Thriller Bark, but in a broken, dead sort of way. Almost like a man who had given up all hope in the world. Wow, now I wish that it was your memories that we were watching, Frankie whispered as even Zoro raised an eyebrow at him. Sanji continued to look as though he was reliving the most terrifying moment of his life before Luffy finally had enough of sitting there and doing nothing. He threw his fishing pole away and asked Memory Sanji for food. But to their luck, no sooner had Luffy threw the pole aside did Memory Usopp yell that there was a whole school of fish heading right towards them. Chopper and Brook cheered at that. See, Memory Brook asked, good things come to those who wait. And I know that better than anyone, yo-ho-ho-ho. Current Brook chuckled cheerfully as Luffy picked up the pole again, looking ready to catch dinner. And at first, Memory Nami seemed to want to join in as she walked over to stand between them so that she could see, with Chopper happily asking if she wanted to try. But their happy mood disappeared at the serious look on Memory Nami's face. Something feels wrong here, she said seriously, and like that, the fish ended up swimming right past them as if they weren't even there. I remember now, Robin sighed, recognizing this scene at last. This was just before we met Kami and Papug. Right, where we reached the red line again, Usopp whispered, his heart constricting painfully. And before that storm with those water snakes, right? But they all knew that it was too late to turn back from what they were seeing now. They made their beds and now they have to live with it. But if Luffy could stand these memories, then how could they dare to not be able to do the same? Speaking of which, Luffy was furious that their dinner had just took off, and he was angrily yelling at the fish to come back, just as Memory Zoro opened his eyes and got everyone's attention by looking up at the darkening sky. Once they all looked up and spotted the black clouds quickly drawing closer, Memory Nami had that stern look back on her face as she whispered, it can't be. Hey, Memory Usopp yelled when he caught sight of her expression, what's with that, we're in big trouble, Captain look. Please, I know now that this is nothing, present-day Nami sighed, I mean, just think of the Malbujmore Sea for example. The new world is no joke, Sanji nodded, having finally recovered from his hellish memories and was back to normal. Those who made it even this far in the Grand Line are considered to be the elite, but the new world is in a whole different league than we first though, Zoro nodded as the sky was cloaked in darkness and the gentle waves started to turn into whirlpools around them. But Zoro was still frowning. Deep down, he knew that they had started to get overconfident about the things that they had done up till they arrived at Sabayati. Now they had every right to be proud of all their accomplishments, but could it be that they were starting to grow cocky? That was the downfall of all the villains they faced to that point, and he knew that it could very well prove to be their own if they didn't shape up. As painful as Sabayati was, it snapped them out of that state of mind. Maybe, in a strange way, he was grateful that it happened. After that moment, he got to spend every 2 years fighting and getting stronger. Also that he could best Mihawk, but, like he had said before, after traveling beside each other all this time, he had come to start working for a new goal. He smirked, wondering just how good a feeling that it was going to be when they finally get there. But at that moment, Memory Nami cried out what was happening here. Serpent currents, she screamed out in terror. Serpent currents. Past Chopper repeated, sounding lost as she turned to the others and warned them to be careful. They got a good look at what she was talking about when the giant currents of water rose from the whirlpools, twisting and turning with each other like snakes, like they were something alive. Everyone had mixed reactions as they stared at the rising currents, with Memory Nami snapping out of her stunned disbelief as she yelled at Sanji to take the wheel. And we know just how strong those currents were if one of the monster trio couldn't even turn the stupid wheel. Present-day Nami sighed as she watched him jump up to the wheel, and they could see that he was putting a lot of force into turning it. When you don't play nice with Mother Nature, she has a nasty habit of turning into a full-blown monster on you. Frankie called out over the noise of the waves. Mothers can have a cruel side too, Robin commented calmly as the currents continued to fly in all directions, one of them even barreling down at them. Memory Zoro took care of it by jumping up and slicing through it, and the force from it had caused it to burst and water was splashed all over. Frankie had just taken out one himself as Memory Zoro barked at Sanji to hurry and wake up so that he could steer properly. "Shut up," Sanji yelled back at him, "with these waves I can't even turn the damn thing." Another serpent current was heading directly for them from the front, with Luffy taking care of it with a single punch just as Brook destroyed the one that had crept up behind them. "What a day that was," present-day Frankie commented as he watched past Brook turn to Usopp and Chopper, asking if they were alright, which they nodded to. "I mean, who would expect water to do something cool like that? At least you enjoyed them," Usopp said in annoyance. "I must say," Memory Brook said in an impressed voice. "I've heard the saying, playful snakes, before. What a perfect sense of naming." "Hey you," Memory Usopp yelled, "is this really the time to be impressed?" "Well, I think they're fascinating," Current Robin spoke up as she watched the fighting continue. Luffy took care of the ones in front, actually taking out 3 at the same time as Frankie dealt with the rear and shielded them from 2 at once. Zoro and Brook were taking care of the sides by actually cutting the water into pieces, but what concerned them however was that Memory Zoro seemed to be out of breath from something that normally would have been so trivial for him. They knew what was wrong here. He was still in a lot of pain and hadn't recovered from his ordeal from Thriller Bark. That proved how serious this was. Even when he was beaten to within an inch of his life up till now, he was always up and ready to go in just a few days, already though it had been several weeks and was still a wreck. "What are you all looking at?" The current Zoro asked them in annoyance, and they all quickly looked away, no one wanting to say a word to that. They tried to focus on the fighting, with Memory Robin taking care of the stray currents that the boys weren't able to get to, and past Usopp and Chopper were crying as they hung onto the mast. "Were we really that pathetic?" Usopp asked as his past self cried out desperately, asking just how long this storm was supposed to last. "At least you toughened up," Sanji offered as Memory Frankie yelled out that their only chance was to use the coup de burst, but past Nami shot that idea down as she looked through the binoculars and delivered the grim news. "That won't work. I can't see an end to the currents." She lowered the binoculars and added, "Even if we use a coup de burst, we won't be able to escape." "Ah, no way," Memory Chopper screamed out, but they looked up as well, and knew that it was true. It seemed to stretch beyond the horizon, so there was truly no end to this. Their only hope of making it through this was to just hold on and keep going forward until they were able to see their way to escape. And that was what they were forced to do. At long last, past Brook laughed a little as he held up his violin. He got everyone's attention as he asked, "Shall we sing a song?" "A song? Really, bro?" Current Frankie asked, his eyebrows raised as he glanced at him. Brook laughed a little as he confessed. "I know it sounds random," he admitted, "but it was what me and my old crew used to do whenever we got caught in the middle of a storm. He just sang our way through it. It had always worked, at least, until that day." They felt a little cold at the confession, and Brook seemed to realize that and laughed a little. "It's alright," he told them, "that just means that I've already begun to feel closer to you all at this point." Yo-ho-ho-ho. Their past selves were all staring at past Brook, who held up his bow and added, "At times like this you just have to remember that no matter how dangerous a storm or current is, it will pass eventually. So let's just sing our way through." Luffy, who was on the Sunny's head, cheered at the idea and called, "Yeah. Great idea, Brook. Let's do it." "A lot of good that did us," Current Sanji sighed as Brook raised up his violin and was about to play, but at that moment the entire ship shook and caused them all to fall over. And right underneath them rose up another current, just so suddenly that before they knew it, they were rising up into the sky right on the back of it. And before they could register that, they were sent flying off, and it was as if they were sent blasted off with a coup de burst. "Oh no." Current Chopper screamed in terror as he knew what was going to happen and shut his eyes. That had been so terrifying, he really thought that he was gonna die back there, and gave Robin a grateful look as she smiled back. "Anytime," she told him as they were sent flying, and Memory Chopper lost his footing completely, slipping and falling behind them. Memory Robin saved him by growing out arms, one after the other, and making a wild snatch for Chopper's leg just in time. That was so scary. Present-day Chopper cried out as his past self seemed to have fainting from that experience. For a devil fruit user, that has got to be the most terrifying thing to happen to you.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Current Brook said as Memory Robin pulled Chopper back to the safety of the ship. Even for someone who could swim, they would never have survived that, present-day Nami told him. Those waves could easily kill even a strong swimmer. I don't think that anyone but a fishman or a mermaid could make it through that, and even then, that's a long shot. They set Memory Chopper on the deck, trying to come out of shock, as they continued on their way, trying to force their way through the storm. But that one current had blasted them much further on, and after about half an hour of these waves, Memory Nami finally cried out through the binoculars, "Look at that. It's that day, isn't it?" Current Zoro asked them, knowing just what was about to show up here. The halfway mark, Frankie nodded sagely. That meant that they were almost to Sabayati, and once there, they would end up coming face to face with Kuma once again, wouldn't they? And after that, well, where they went after that is anyone's guess. That's past. Usopp gasped as the others stared ahead, able to see it even from this distance. Even the cationic chopper was pushing himself up to see what was going on. I can see it, I can see it, Luffy cheered, and through the storm of serpent currents, they could see what appeared to be a giant wall in front of them. This brought back the memory of the first time they saw it, that they just couldn't help but see that memory planted in front of their eyes. Luffy then screamed out at the top of his lungs, "It's the red line." The red line, Current, Nami whispered as she stared up at the vast wall. You know, after seeing all the memories up till now, it really showed how far we had come, hasn't it? So much has happened since that day. Sanji nodded as he stared long and hard at it. Who would have guessed that we would have ever made it this far? I'm amazed that we even made it halfway given all the craziness that happened, Usopp whispered, feeling a strange humility going through him at the sight of it. Just looking at this wall made him want to cry when he remembered all their battles and victories. Too bad that their winning streak was broken here. Memory Nami ran forward, a smile on her face as she cried out, "We finally made it this far." There was a nasty storm on that day too, Memory Sanji said, sounding close to laughing. No one could speak a word, as their memories all came to their minds. All what they experienced and what they fought in order to get even this far. They were now halfway around the world, and the only thing that caused a deep sadness in them was the fact that it took them 2 years to continue any farther than this. Memory Brook seemed to be awed at the sight of it and he whispered, "It has taken me 50 years. Hopefully, it won't take that long to finish the rest of this journey," present-day Brook added. Usopp clapped a hand on his shoulder and told him, "Don't worry. I'm sure that you'll see Laboon soon. Yo-ho-ho-ho. I am so looking to seeing that dear whale again." Brook cried out in joy at the very thought. "Oh, I have so much time to catch up on, but I plan on making it all up to him one day." With his hand on his hat, a rather evil smile on his face, Luffy cried out, "Let's go, you guys." But it was as if the sea itself heard his command and tried to stop them. The largest serpent current broke the surface and blocked their way, causing screams of fear and, in Luffy's case, delight. The two swordsmen looked ready to jump up and fight it, with Memory Zoro snapping at Sanji to steer properly this time, and he barked back to just shut up. "I don't take orders from you, you jerk." Current Sanji snarled at him. "It's not my fault you're useless," Zoro retorted, "I mean, you can't even steer a ship properly. If it was so easy, then why didn't you do it?" Sanji demanded. "Because I was trying to keep us from getting killed," he shot back. "Enough. Both of you," Nami screeched at them. Memory Frankie was yelling at them, asking if they could avoid that behemoth if they used the paddles. "We won't make it in time." Past Robin answered him loudly, and they knew she was right. Even if they had a heads up, they couldn't have avoided that thing in time. "Sanji," Memory Nami cried out, "ride that wave." Understanding at once, Past Sanji nodded and kept his hands on the wheel, even as Memory Frankie was yelling at her for suggesting something so stupid. But she just smiled back and yelled that they rode a current just like this when they visited Sky Island and they could do it again. "We're getting pretty good at that," Chopper nodded as he thought of the knock upstream and the thrust upstream. At this rate, they would all be experts at flying, especially with all the coup de bursts they pull off. The serpent current's head rose up before it fell forward, crashing right in front of them, but that was just what they were waiting for. They had jumped up onto its back, zigzagging the whole way up. "Yeah, that's what I'm talking about." Current Usopp cheered. "Sunny can do anything." Was there any doubt? Present-day Frankie laughed as Memory Frankie took the wheel from Sanji. "I bet we can use a coup de burst now." His past laughed. Memory Nami agreed as she called for them to pull in the sails, which Brook and Zoro took care of in a flash, and suddenly they were flying through the air once again when they pulled out their secret weapon. Through the air they soared once again, and soon left the darkness behind them, and they crashed where the waves had turned smooth as glass and they were near the stone wall. They stared up at it in wonder, marveling at the sheer mass of the wall as it towered over their heads and reached up so high that the sky seemed to give out before the red line did. Luffy was laughing as he stared at it, hanging onto Sunny's head as he smiled wider with every second. "We're here, we've finally made it this far," he cried as he punched the air excitedly. Memory Chopper's eyes were wide in amazement. "I can't see the top. It's huge. So, this is the red line," he cried out. "Seeing it from here, it really makes you see how that thing stretches across the world," Current Brook said, staring up at the wall. "It feels kind of nostalgic," Memory Nami said softly as Memory Sanji smiled in full agreement as lit up his cigarette. Past Zoro had a big smirk as he asked to no one in particular, "It makes me wonder if we've changed since then." "Not at all," Current Robin smiled. "What are you talking about? We've all changed a lot," Usopp asked her, startled that he heard those words. "Think about it," Robin chuckled, "in some ways we've changed a lot, in other ways we haven't changed at all. I mean, you still tell lies, Nami still loves money, Zoro still gets lost and can't agree with Sanji." "Hey," the two interrupted in annoyance as Memory Usopp was in tears at the sight of it all, talking about some of the stuff that had happened to them. My point is that no matter how much we did change, some parts of us probably never will. Robin finished and they all thought that over. It was funny, but despite all that they had learned and gone through since they joined the crew, personality-wise, they honestly were the same as they had been from the start. Though they supposed that was always good to know, no matter what happened to them they'd always be them. Luffy was laughing again. Anyway, now we're halfway there. He cheered at them. The Twin Cape on the other side of the world, where we met Laboon, is connected to his spot. It's great that we've made it this far, huh? Apparently, I came over Reverse Mountain from South Blue when I was just a little kid, but I guess that's a 30-year-old story, Memory Frankie said, thinking back. I came to this sea from West Blue, 5 years ago, past Robin added, smiling as she thought that all over. Right, that was when I first met Crocodile, the current one stated as she thought it over. Though she couldn't say that those were pleasant memories. When we've crossed the other half of the world and see this wall again, at that time, I'll be king of the pirates. Luffy cried out in delightful joy. And if they weren't thrilled at the thought of entering the new world before, they sure were now. Just knowing that their dreams were halfway there was enough to make them want to get there as fast as possible. But if it were that easy to get across the Grand Line, then someone would have found the One Piece before now. Zoro sighed as the memory faded. I wonder just why no one's ever made it that far in almost 25 years, Nami added with a frown. I'm sure we'll find out sooner or later, Frankie pointed out, and they nodded in agreement. They always found out the truth in the end, even if they didn't want to know. The next memory appeared soon after that talk and the weather was perfect this time. But instead of being on the Sunny's deck, they were standing right next to it, right on top of the water. The memory had appeared just in time to see the shark submerge 3 resurface. It broke through the water, causing Usopp to let out a startled cry, thinking that it was a real shark for a moment before the top opened up. Luffy poked his head out as he jumped out happily, Memory, Robin and Brook right behind him as they looked up at the Sunny. We're back. Luffy called up to them and they saw the others appear at the railing to welcome them back. Right, present, Robin said, thinking it over. This was still when we were looking for a way to get to Fishman Island. Sanji's eyes lit up and he cried out joyfully, you mean, Kami? Yes, in fact, we should be seeing her in a few minutes, she admitted, and Sanji looked like he was about to faint from happiness at the thought of seeing Kami again. It's no use, Luffy said with a confused frown as he looked up at Nami. We can't see anything at the bottom of the sea. You sure Fishman Island's really there? Oh, it's there, just deeper than we first thought, current Nami stated as she thought about the journey to the bottom of the sea. You know, we really should have thought that it would be something like that when Kokoro told us about it, Robin informed her as Memory Brook happily told them how exciting his first submarine ride had been. Why didn't we think to ask her more about how to get there? Chopper asked them. We didn't think about it, that's the whole point, Nami sighed, still wondering how come she never thought to ask her more questions about that. But she supposed that it all worked out for the best in the end. If we had gone down any further we would have been crushed by the water pressure, past Robin added, and that was when the current Zoro realized something. Hey, why did we send 3 devil fruit users down there? He asked them and they blinked at the relation. Well, Luffy wanted to go, Robin informed him, and Brook really wanted to ride in the submarine. I went to make sure that things went smoothly, I guess. That's real smart, Sanji muttered to himself in annoyance, sending people who can't swim down to try and find Fishman Island. Hey, the shark sub wasn't going to break that easily, Frankie told them all proudly. The log pose is definitely pointing straight down, past Nami whispered to herself, sounding more lost than ever at what they were supposed to do. This isn't good, I should have gotten some more info from Lola and the others. But if you had, we'd never have met Kami, would we? Chopper asked innocently. And I suppose that she would have been digested, and Hachi sold off as a slave, Robin nodded as she thought it all over. And if we never met them, who knows how things would have gone at Sabayati. I still think that we would have been in trouble with the celestial dragons anyway, Usopp sighed in despair. I mean, it was only going to be a matter of time before we ran into one of them and beaten them up without knowing who they were. Yeah, but then we might not have met Rayleigh, and think of all that he's done for us, Nami pointed out. It's like it was all supposed to happen like it should have, Zoro frowned, once again, thinking about how fate seemed to be one step ahead of them all. Just what did it have planned for them all next? As their past selves were all wondering just what they were supposed to do now, Luffy had turned his head to a little ways away to where bubbles were popping up on the water's surface. And not even a minute later, a large sea king burst out, with its lower half serpent-like, but the top half was of a giant rabbit with razor-sharp teeth and red eyes. And instead of arms, it had large fins attached to its sides as it seemed to fly overhead, his mouth open wide, as if hoping to swallow them all. It's that thing from before, Luffy yelled. It followed us here. Past Brook screamed. Yeah, that was the same one who did try to eat us while we were looking down there, present Robin nodded in recognition. Why do the strangest things seem to follow us back, I wonder, Sanji asked himself calmly. Still, there wasn't anything to worry about. Luffy had stretched his way over to Sunny's figurehead and smiled up at the sea rabbit, looking ready for a quick fight. Don't think you can beat me when we're above the water, he called, taunting to it as the rabbit turned its attention directly to him. It didn't last long at all, of course, with the battle ending with a single gum-gum rifle to his gut. Sea kings don't seem to be that big a deal for us anymore, President Brook said as he watched the beat seem to choke from the impact of the blow. They were never that tough, Zoro shrugged. Again, maybe for you superhuman freaks, but we're not monsters like you guys. Nami yelled at him. That depends on your definition of monster, Zoro yawned to himself, privately thinking that devils come in all shapes and sizes, look at Nami. But their past selves were handling seeing that giant monster very well. In fact, none of them seemed to be remotely concerned for it. For some reason it didn't look all that huge, they heard Memory Usopp say, not screaming once as he came onto the deck from the inflatable pool that Frankie had designed for them all. Because we dealt with Oz. Past Chopper said, just as calmly, it doesn't seem that big. And he laughed proudly to himself. Ah, you see. Robin asked the two standing next to her, I told you, it's all about experience. Already here, you are taking what you learned and are using it to stay calm. Yeah, Current Usopp said, thinking it over proudly. I guess you're right. There is a saying out there, Sanji said as he breathed out the smoke comfortably, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Yeah, I get it now, Chopper cried out, his eyes wide with happiness. He'll remember everything from here on out, and by the time they meet up with Laboon on the other side of the world, then he might not be afraid of anything anymore. Come on, he was riding on the ship with the future king of the pirates. What's there to be scared of? But as they watched the sea rabbit fall backwards, the impact of the punch caused the beast to spit something right out of its mouth. Like the bottle cap on a soda bottle when too much energy has built, they came bursting right out and sent flying into the sky. As they watched them, they could hear the sounds of screaming coming from one of them as they began to fall back down. Current Sanji yelled in joy at the sight of it, and had to be restrained by Usopp and Chopper, even though there was no point. But they did climb up, onto the deck, and watched as their past selves seemed taken aback by whatever was falling. One of the happiest days of my life, Current Sanji sighed dreamily as Kami and Papug came into full sight, the mermaid crashing right on top of Memory Sanji, and the starfish landing on the deck right next to them. You know, it might not be as flashy as some of ours, but that was one heck of an entrance, Present Frankie muttered impressed. I'll say, Current Sanji said dreamily as Kami slowly pushed herself back up and tried to catch her breath. We're saved, she gasped before she looked to Papug and cried out enthusiastically, that was incredible. Nothing phases her for long, does it? Current Usopp asked, wondering just how she could be so upbeat after almost getting digested by a sea king. He wasn't the only one who thought that, for Papug turned back at her and snapped, don't act all impressed. A little longer in there and we'd be goners. How could you not run away from a monster like that? She lowered her head in shame. Well, I didn't notice it, she muttered naively. How could you possibly not notice something as large as that? He demanded before he noticed that she was lying on top of something and pointed it out to her. When she looked, and realized what it was, she screamed and she began to shake him, apologizing over and over again for hurting him. Memory Sanji however just looked like he had died and gone to heaven as he told her that it was alright, that he had never felt better. And I meant every word, Present Sanji sighed blissfully, it was an honor to almost be crushed by a mermaid like that. But the rest of them just stared at her in shock before she seemed to sense that she was being watched. She turned her head and glanced at them and screamed when she saw them all so that they could get a full look at her. She had green hair and dark purple eyes shining on a sweet, innocent face. She had a long pink tail with light fins and a white dorsal fin, which matched the pink and yellow, criminal, brand shirt, and orange backpack in the shape of a giant shell. She gave her classic face fault at the sight of them all, with her jaw opening wide and showing her teeth as her tongue stuck out in a zigzag. What a shock, she screamed. There are so many humans here. What? Luffy choked out startled, as Chopper stepped forward, with a little inner tube around his waist as he said, we're surprised too. Not every day that a mermaid falls out of the sky like that, Present Nami muttered as Kami quickly got over her shock and was actually smiling at them. I thought I was gonna be digested, thank you all for saving me, she said told them gratefully. I'm Kami, by the way. I keep getting eaten by sea monsters. This was probably the 20th time this happened to me. How can she be that absent-minded to get eaten that many times? Current Zoro whispered to himself. Oh, Kami-chan, you're so cute when you're scatterbrained, Sanji sighed peacefully as he lay on his stomach as he stared at her. You get eaten too much, said past Usopp obviously. I have to repay you somehow. Kami said, thinking it over before she smiled at a sudden idea. Oh, I know. How would you all like some octopus balls? Octopus balls, Luffy repeated, his tongue hanging out and he was drooling. I love that stuff. Yo-ho-ho-ho, so do I. Brook sighed, thinking about how good it had been when they had that wonderful food after they had saved Hachi. What a meal that was, great, now he was dying for some of those octopus balls right now. Though that was a little late for him now, wasn't it? Really? Kami said excitedly. Then that'll be 500 berries per person, please. You know, it's not paying us back if we had to pay her, Current Usopp whispered to himself. Good thing too, Nami sighed, do you guys know how much you ate? We're lucky that they hadn't gone out of business because of us. Kind of ironic though, selling octopus balls when Hachi is an octopus fishman, Zoro pointed out. He's not worried that might be a distant cousin or something. No one knew how it worked, so none of them dared to answer that question as Papug jumped up and gave Kami a hard slap to the face as he yelled out, "You're not supposed to charge them." Kami yelped. "You're right, I screwed up. I personally find that part so adorable about her." Current Sanji sighed lovingly as Kami calmed down and past Sanji was twirling around happily. "Mermaids, mermaids," he chanted joyfully, "yes. I've finally got to meet one of them. And she's so cute. This is the first time I've ever met one." Kami was it. "This isn't the first time though." Memory Usopp spoke up, "You met old lady Kokura didn't you? Why do you have to remind me of that?" Current Sanji cried, sobbing in pain as Brook shivered. "Do you both have to be so rude?" Nami demanded angrily. "Oh, like you didn't faint when you saw her," Usopp retorted. "Who wouldn't faint?" she retorted, "but that doesn't mean that you have to keep being jerks like that." At the sound of Kokura's name, Memory Sanji stopped dancing as a horrified look came over his face. He staggered a few feet away before he fell to his knees so that you could almost see the dark clouds over his head. "Thriller bark?" he asked, with a terrified expression in his eyes. "No, that wasn't scary. Not scary at all. The scariest thing we've encountered so far was..." Memory Usopp seemed to be thinking the whole thing over before he looked a little green in the face. That's right, Sanji," he cried out, "let's just pretend that never happened. This is the first mermaid we've ever met. You guys are so rude." Memory Nami snapped at them as Luffy looked to Frankie and asked him what they were talking about, and that he didn't know that Kokura had been a mermaid and that she could walk and everything. Memory Frankie didn't look surprised as he told him that he missed it since he was fighting Lucci. "Ain't he the lucky one?" Current Sanji sighed enviously. Luffy's face seemed to turn blue at the thought. "Imagining old lady Kokura as a mermaid is somehow really gross," he said. Memory Nami then punched Luffy and yelled out, "You guys are terrible. That hurt. What's up with you, Nami?" Luffy yelled back, as if he were a little kid, being scolded for no reason. She didn't even bother to answer him as she folded her arms. "Geez," she said in annoyance, "when it comes to these guys' expectations of mermaids." Memory Robin just laughed a little at that as Brook happily walked over to Kami and asked if she could lend him some money, which responded in Sanji kicking him when Kami screamed at the sight of him. "I can open my head as well," past Brook said, opening his head and trying to make her laugh. "Isn't that funny?" "That's so cool," Current Chopper said to their Brook, who laughed and took off his hat so that he could open the top of his head for their enjoyment. "I guess," Present Frankie said before he added, "but not as super as having your stomach open." And he then popped his refrigerator stomach open so that he could grab some cola. The women rolled their eyes as Usopp and Chopper cheered for him. Meanwhile, Memory Sanji was continuing to try and kick Brook away before Kami started to laugh and clap at Brook's funny antics. Luffy however was suddenly asking her if she could poop or not, which resulted in Sanji trying to take care of him as well. "He asks the important questions so that we don't have to," Current Brook laughed. "I don't want to know." Sanji yelled at him, "Quit trying to kill my fantasy." "Oh, Kami," called Papug, who was leaning against the side of the ship, looking depressed that they were all ignoring him. "This is just weird. Aren't you forgetting someone? Who's the one being left out of this fun group?" "Answer. Me. You think that a talking starfish would be enough to get everyone's attention?" Current Nami whispered. "Kinda hard to notice him when there's a mermaid around, yo-ho-ho-ho." Brook laughed. Luffy, who was still under attack by Sanji, heard his voice and finally noticed him. "Oh, that's right," Luffy said as he stretched out his arm and grabbed Papug by his hat and pulled him over so that he could ask Kami. "I was wondering about that. Hey, Kami, what's this? This talking glove thingy?" "Oh, sorry," Kami said as Luffy poked the starfish. "I almost forgot. He's my pet, Papug. He's a starfish, and he's my master." "Master," Luffy repeated. "Yes, my master," she confirmed for him. "This guy?" Luffy asked as if he was just making sure, and that was when Papug greeted them all. And even pulled out a ukulele as he began to strum a song for them all to hear. "I still don't see how a starfish could be someone's master and a pet at the same time," Current Chopper whispered. "Well, you're our doctor and pet," Sanji offered. "What?" Chopper yelled out at him furiously as Sanji laughed and waved his hands around in front of him. "Joking," he laughed as Papug continued to sing. "I'm just joking." Their past selves weren't even listening to what the starfish was saying as they watched Kami showing off the criminal brand t-shirt that Papug designed, and she happily told them that she wanted to be a designer as well someday. "And she'll be the best one under the sea," Sanji sighed blissfully. After introductions all around, Kami thanked them again for helping her, decided to properly reward her saviors with her promise of some octopus balls. "Well, talk about great timing," Memory Nami said. "We were having trouble figuring out what to do. I want to ask you two something." Luffy, however, interrupted them by saying, "Hey, Nami, the octopus balls come first." Of course his belly always comes first, Present Nami sighed in annoyance. Honestly, is that guy ever not hungry? She used to joke about how he had a bottomless pit for a stomach, but now she was seriously wondering if it was true. Kami smiled as she said that she remembered that and they could have all that they wanted once they met up with her friend Hachi. She then reached into her backpack and pulled out a baby transponder snail, saying that she'll call him and let him know where they are. Hello, Kami said cheerfully when someone finally picked up on the other line. Hachi, this is Kami. Sorry, I kinda got lost. Where are you right now? Yeah, I guess that she wasn't expecting something to happen to Hachi, Usopp said sympathetically as Kami's smile faded when no one answered right away. And when the voice finally spoke up, it wasn't who she thought. Oh, that voice must be Kami, right? The smug voice answered at the other end. Hachi, she asked in concern as the voice laughed. Do you know who you're talking to? The voice laughed. This isn't Hachi, you know. Kami screamed in shock, completely taken aback at that. You're not Hakin, she screamed in terror. Over the transponder snail, they found out that Hachi had been kidnapped by Macro and his crew. Thanks to the flying fish riders, they had finally been able to subdue him, and was now holding him hostage at their base. And if she wanted him back, she was to come get him. They allowed Hachi to speak to her, to prove that they weren't lying, and he told her not to come for him. The message ended with Macro's gang hitting him and laughing as the message was cut off. After staring at the sleeping snail, Kami decided to decline rewarding them for the moment. Memory Nami however was looking deeply uneasy. And the current Nami knew why. She had recognized that voice, and she was scared at the thought of admitting that it had been one of her former captors. She remembered trying to remind herself that Arlong and his men had all been captured and sent to jail. Well, it was better that it was Hachi, who at least felt ashamed by his actions, than Arlong escaping. Yeah, she'd rather have Hachi free over Arlong any day of the week. Perhaps now, maybe even Arlong was feeling some shame in all that he had done, though she highly doubted that. She looked up to see her past self putting it out of her mind for the moment. Sorry, Luffy, said Kami regretfully, but, is it alright if I give you octopus balls another time? I've got to go and save my friend. Good thing that we were there to help her, Zoro stated as he thought back to how easily she had been captured. Really, that was just sad. You would think that they had some kind of plan instead of jumping right in there like. He stopped and blinked at what he was just thinking before he smirked. Isn't that what they were always doing? Well, at least they could take care of themselves. Kami could barely do that most of the time, but he had to give her credit for wanting to save her friend even if she didn't stand a chance. Luffy looked ready to whine at the thought of not getting the food until Memory Sanji and Frankie gave him several knocks to the head to keep him quiet. Wait, Kami, Memory Nami said coming forward, with that glint in her eyes that never meant anything good. I shouldn't be meddling here, but if you want to go save your friend, then we can help you. Memory Usopp and Frankie nodded seriously behind her before she added, no, that's wrong. She then jerked her thumb at the boys and revised, I mean they'll help you. Why us? The two yelled at her. You know, you could at least think to ask us before you volunteer us for something like this, current Frankie growled. Well, it wasn't like you boys were doing anything, she offered with a playful smile. And in exchange, her past self offered with a wink, how about you help us get to Fishman Island? Really, Nami? Kami asked, her eyes widening in elation at the thought. Of course, right Luffy? Past Nami said, looking at Luffy. Huh? He asked, still a bit disappointed that he wouldn't get any octopus balls at the moment, sure. All worked out in the end, current Usopp sighed as he patted his belly at the thought. You did get Hachi's recipe didn't you, Sanji? Yeah, Sanji nodded. He wasn't so keen on letting his secret recipe slip, but he said that he'd make an exception for me. You're gonna help me save Hachi, Luffy? Asked Kami hopefully. Well, I'm fine with it, Luffy stated, but who is this Hachi, anyway? He's my best friend, Kami explained. He's also my boss. He runs the octopus ball shop that I work at. The octopus balls he makes are the best in the world. Well, she did it there, Frankie laughed. If he didn't want to save him before that, he did now. Luffy's eyes suddenly widened at the announcement, and drool was beginning to fall as he registered what she said. That's very important, he yelled before he turned to the others. Men, even if it costs you your lives, we're gonna save the octopus balls. Yeah, Usopp, Sanji, Frankie, Chopper, and Brook cheered out loudly, each one of them looking half-starved all of a sudden. You're just as interested in the food as the others, Sanji, current Nami pointed out. It's nice not having to cook once in a while, he answered as he took his cigarette out and breathed out a puff of air, and I wanted to see if it was really the best. If it was, it would easily be better than my Sejun. And if it was, I wanted the recipe for it. Was it better? Chopper asked him curiously. Sanji didn't answer for a moment because he knew that the truth was that it was far superior to when he makes octopus balls, not that he would tell them that. They do say that pirates are like stray dogs, Present Robin said in amusement, always hungry. Just one mealtime takes more food than a busy day at the Barati, Sanji sighed as he thought, almost longingly of how easy it was to make food there in those days. Not that he regretted coming along, the idea of cooking food for angels like Nami and Robin made everything seem worth it. They say it's okay, Memory, Nami said as the boys cheered. She then sat next to her against the mast and asked Kami if she had any idea where this base was supposed to be. Kami reached into her bag and pulled out a map where Papug made an educated guess to where they had to have Hachi. For now they were to head to Sabayati and ask the fish along the way. Their past selves were then amazed as she went hopping over to the side of the ship and called to some fish and asked if they could show them the way to the Flying Fish Rider's base. Sabayati, present-day Chopper, whispered as they all looked at each other in worry, knowing that this was the beginning of the end of their journey, for a long time anyway. They silently watched, just enjoying the scene as they turned course and followed the foamy arrow the fish had created. About 5 minutes later though, Memory Zoro came jumping down to the deck from the crow's nest, clearly fresh from a hard workout. I noticed that you seem to be obsessed with getting stronger right after Thriller Bark, Robin whispered to him, and he raised his eyebrows at her. I always like to work out, he said, not looking at her as she smiled at him. The truth was, everything that happened at Thriller Bark with Kuma, and at Sabayati was because he wasn't strong enough. He knew that, and that's what made it so hard to accept. If he had been stronger, then he could have protected everyone, and then he wouldn't have had to make that deal in the first place. Are we setting off already? His past self asked as he wiped the sweat from his face with a towel. Does it look like we can make it to Fishman Island? Forget that, Luffy said excitedly as he turned to introduce him to Kami. Check this out. This is Kami the mermaid. She's real. Isn't that awesome? She stood up and greeted him happily as Zoro looked at her in mild surprise. A mermaid, huh? He asked, and you could almost see him erasing his memory of Kokura. First time I've ever met one. His memory. Memory, Chopper cried out. He just erased his memory. And I was happy with keeping it that way, the current Zoro said as Luffy was filling his past self in on taking a short detour. Would you all just grow up? Nami demanded hotly as Kami began to worry about Hachi again. Hachi sounded like he was having trouble talking. She whispered to herself, I'm sure that they've done something awful to him. Well, he's tough, Papug reminded her in a consoling way, so he should be alright. He turned to Luffy and the others. Anyway, you guys were pretty quick to offer your help, but are you sure you can handle this? Yeah, said Luffy confidently, we're strong, you know. Hell, yeah, current Sanji said in agreement. I should warn you, Papug began, there's not just one gang of kidnappers around here. There are plenty of these guys on the Sabayati archipelago. Human trading is big business around here. Right, present Robin sighed, remembering this. It was terrible on Sabayati, Chopper nodded, feeling sick to the stomach at the thought of that poor man who was just trying to escape from the celestial dragons and how that exploding collar went off. Those bastard nobles had no souls, Sanji added grumpily. I mean, how anyone could let them get away with doing even half of the things that they've done, I don't know. Because they are the world government, Robin reminded him quietly. They can do whatever they want, because they know that they can get away with it. Well, that's just the biggest load of crap I've ever heard, Zoro growled, still wishing that he had his chance to hack those fat losers to pieces when he had the chance. Well, if he ever met one of them again, he wasn't going to hold back, that was his promise. Memory Sanji took a long puff on a cigarette before he blew out some smoke. Selling human lives, he repeated, that's just low. Yeah, and the ones who buy those lives are even lower, current Sanji added bitterly to himself. And seeing how mermaids are particularly valuable, Papug continued, the Macro crew, a gang of 3 fishmen, have been after Kami for quite a while now. Hachi probably got worried, thinking that we had been kidnapped by Macro's gang, and came looking for us after we got eaten by that sea rabbit. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Warm Memories and Brotherly Bonds by RoseDragonWitch. That's probably it, Kami whispered, sounding guilty. I mean, Hakan is a kind, straightforward person, after all. It's my fault. Well, he's more simple-minded than straightforward if you ask me, present Zoro muttered as he remembered how easily it was to talk Hachi into giving him a ride from Arlong Park. Meanwhile, his past self sat down on the stairs and took a long drink of water before he brought up that very same Hachi they fought before. Memory Sanji was still on his cigarette, spoke up by telling them that if somehow turned out to be the same guy, then they weren't going to save him, but what were the odds of that? The world is a smaller place than we thought, current Robin chuckled to herself. I wonder just what that idiot had been doing with his free time since he escaped the Marines, Nami said thoughtfully to herself. Knowing Hachi, it was bound to be a very strange story. Usually, Hachi could be able to beat those guys easily, Papug told them, but who'd have thought that the Flying Fish Riders would help them? Who are they? Memory Frankie asked him. Papug turned to him and explained, another gang of kidnappers who started causing a lot of power around these parts recently. They say that if they target you then you're doomed. Dramatic, considering they aren't that strong, current Sanji said with a roll of his eyes. And whose fault is that? Zoro asked him. I hope you aren't saying that it's mine. He yelled. If you didn't get yourself such a crappy bounty poster, none of this ever would have happened, Zoro smirked. He was really feeding fuel to the fire this time. You think I wanted this? Sanji roared out as the fire licked his body. Don't you know how much I wish I can beat those damn Marines in for this? Calm down, Robin told them, you can argue about this later, right? Her words succeeded in calming Sanji down, but he was still glaring at Zoro, who was innocently smirking back. Papug was still talking and they had to force themselves to listen to him go on about their leader named Duval, who always wore an iron mask, and appeared to be looking for someone since they've been searching every ship that came by. Luffy promised her that they would save the octopus balls, with Papug reminding him harshly that it was the seller that they wanted to rescue, before he turned to Brook and asked him to play a song for them. Which he was only happy to do so. As they began to have a small party on deck, simply enjoying themselves, Current Chopper suddenly asked, I wonder how everyone's doing on Fishman Island. Oh, I'm not worried about them, Nami smiled, I think that they're all doing just fine. Especially with Jimby-chan keeping an eye on things. I really do wish that he could have come with us, Usopp sighed, but he did promise to join us later on, didn't he? Yes, but he has to be careful, Robin warned. Careful? For what? Sanji asked curiously. Jimby is the captain of the Sun Pirates, Robin explained, we heard part of their story from him just before we arrived at the plaza and fought against the new Fishman pirates. Jimby chose to become a warlord so that his crew could be allowed to return home as well. But after he lost his warlord title, he lost that privilege as well, Nami sighed. That's right, Robin confirmed, and up until the war, it had been Whitebeard protecting Fishman Island. Yeah, and then Big Mom, we know this, Zoro shrugged. Because Jimby joined up with her, Robin finished, having heard about the Sun Pirates before. After she had heard that he had been with Luffy at the war, she had been following his movements as well. A part of her hoping that she could find some news on Luffy, she had been glad that she could meet him face to face. He did, Chopper said in great surprise. It doesn't surprise me, Robin went on as they looked at her, after all, it was probably the best thing to do. It kept his crew and his home safe. Safe my ass, Zoro grunted, a fat lot of good she did during that civil war. The point is, that's the reason that he couldn't join with us right away, Robin informed them all. After all, when you break a deal with an emperor, you have to be determined to go against them. Because Big Mom might not take well to that. There's always a chance that she could turn her revenge onto Fishman Island for that. Yeah, I see how that would be hard, Usopp said in understanding. And it wouldn't surprise me if she did want to destroy the island, Sanji added darkly, I mean, since they couldn't pay her the candy that they owed her, she was going to go ahead and destroy it anyway. Who's crazy enough to destroy an island over candy? Chopper cried out. Well, that's why Luffy had to trade all that treasure to make up for it, Sanji added as Nami's eyes narrowed at the reminder how they lost all that money. What I don't get is why they gave us all that candy instead of giving it to her in the first place, Zoro muttered, I mean, we could understand why they didn't want to give it to us. We had plenty of food at that feast. Wouldn't it have saved them a lot of trouble? And let us keep all that treasure, Nami whispered to herself mournfully. It all ended well, Robin reminded her patiently, that's all that matters, right? Yeah, Nami sighed gloomily. But at that moment, the music stopped and they looked up in time to see that the fish had broken formation and were bolting. They stayed around long enough to apologize to Kami that this was as far as they could go. Why? What's wrong? Luffy questioned. They're here, Papug cried in panic, pointing to the sky. The flying fish riders. At his warning, Luffy went and stretched his arm out so that he could jump to Sunny's figurehead and looked around wildly, yelling that he couldn't see anything. Kami went waddling up to the helm, having to hop thanks to her tail. Kami, wait, past Nami called anxiously. Where are you going? You have to hide. But Kami ignored Nami and pointed up the sky as she cried out, wrong. They're not in the sea, but in the air. They all looked up with Luffy in time to see several huge fish with masks over their heads came falling out of the sky, forcing Luffy to duck back as they crashed into the water. But they didn't stay down for long, for as soon as the waves they created even calmed down, the fish were back in the air, and all three of them had a rider on their backs. That's still so cool, Current Usopp whispered as his past self cried out, the fish are actually flying. I'm guessing that's how they got their names, Brook said happily as Luffy seemed to be drooling over in amazement. Is this the time to be impressed? Barked past Zoro. Damn, it looks like they're ready for a fight. Memory Frankie said, cracking his knuckles together. And the flying fish riders began to dive at them once again. With Usopp at the wheel, he did his best to steer them away from danger as the riders kept getting closer, and at one point dropping bombs right over their heads. Thankfully, Luffy and Zoro were able to take them out so that they exploded above the ship and not leaving as much as a scratch on any of them. Be careful, Kami warned. Once the flying fish jumps out of the water, it can stay in the air for 5 minutes. Memory Usopp panicked at first, at least until the riders did something strange, it was as if they just gave up. They flew off, heading in the same direction that they had been sailing in before, and leaving them all lost as to what happened. That's weird, Luffy summed up for them all. Yeah, it was it really too much to hope for that we could have gotten out of that mess without having to fight? Current Usopp sighed. I guess so, Brook stated, as their past selves were staring after them in disbelief. They were not the kind to give up that easily. It seemed like they received some kind of message. Memory Robin let them all know. Maybe they were ordered to retreat. Though I wouldn't know why. Again, it's the cook's fault, Present Zoro said as Sanji glared at him. Is it my fault that guy's an idiot? He yelled at him. I wanna ride one of those. Luffy hollered, jumping up and down excitedly. Those flying fish can stay in the air for 5 minutes, right? Awesome. Of course he would, Current Nami sighed, and he's almost drowned because of that. Doesn't he think things through? Ever? They all looked at each other before she sighed again, adding, no, of course not. What was I thinking? Anyway, past Sanji said, gazing around them anxiously, like he half expected them to be attacked again by more flying fish. The place we're heading to now is their base, right? In that case, we better be ready to fight them again. He turned his head to the wind and added, but who'd have guessed they attack us from the sky? At that, Memory Usopp suggested that they bring the cannons out to the deck and Frankie was all for it. Kami, meanwhile, was leaning against the railing and staring at the water with a grim expression on her face. I wonder if Hachi's doing all right, they heard her whisper sadly. You know that Marco's really after you, Papug reminded her sternly. You've got to be careful too. I personally would have beat up each one of those punks if they dared to hurt a hair on Kami-chan's head. Current Sanji declared, any man, fish or otherwise, that dared to hurt a woman was no longer a man to him, and deserved nothing less than a kick in the ass. They waited, occasionally talking about anything that crossed their minds, as they sat back on the deck and watched everyone run around. Current Usopp was lying on his back, staring up at the sky, not even batting an eye whenever one of their past selves walked right through him. Usopp-san, Brook asked in concern as Usopp sighed. This is also the day, isn't it? He asked grimly and they all looked at him in confusion, wondering just what it was that he was talking about until he added, the same day that we last saw each other for all that time. Zoro sighed as he glanced over at him. You're right, he admitted as everyone glanced at each other. It wasn't until late that evening did we have to deal with Kuma, and, well, we all know what happened after that, don't we? Hard to believe that we were all so happy and excited that morning, Nami whispered, sitting back and resting her chin on her knees as she watched them all continue to have a good time, despite that they were on a possible dangerous rescue mission. I still don't get why Ace thought that we'd be able to help Luffy out here. There must have been a reason, Robin told her. Ace knows what goes on inside Luffy's head better than anyone. Even better than any of us, he must honestly believe that it was in Luffy's best interest if he wanted us to see this. None of them looked like they even agreed with that, yet there wasn't any more time to think about it. For at that moment, Luffy called out from the front, huh? Hey, I can see it now. They glanced up to see that he was telling the truth. It looked like an entire village of treehouses with roofs of straw and simple wood built on top of the water. Present-day Frankie told them all that if there is ever a storm around here, then it could easily crush this entire place. Why anyone would ever think of building such a place in the middle of the sea, he didn't know. Well, it is good for them since they can fly with those flying fish, Current Nami reminded him, and they have water all around to keep them going, but the rest of us were stuck on the ship. So they aren't just crazy, Frankie nodded as he understood all that. It was a pretty good plan, annoying, but it worked all right. And this Hachi guy is being kept there? Luffy asked. Hey, let's hurry up and save the octopus balls. We got it already. Memory Frankie yelled in irritation, just wait a minute. Memory Nami was frowning to herself at the name, Hachi, again, but she didn't say anything as past Sanji proclaimed to Kami that he would save him without a doubt. She smiled gratefully back at him before she seemed to remember something. That was when she gave them all an interesting piece of news. Oh, but everyone, please be careful, she called above them. The Marco crew alone has captured me about 30 times. She says that like she's proud of it. Current Brook whispered as Memory Usopp came and hit her with his hand, you get captured too much. And she laughed a little as he added, you get eaten too much too. She needs to start paying attention around her, Present Frankie sighed. Regardless however, they continued onwards to the Flying Fish Rider's base, but at first glance it all appeared to be completely deserted. There was mixed reactions, some calm, others not so much. Especially Memory Usopp claiming he had things such as, can't go on this island, disease, or, can't go on this village built on top of the water, sickness. Really, can't you come up with more believable mystery illnesses or something? Zoro poked at him, as Usopp shrugged back. It's true, he said as his past self yelled out worriedly, Luffy. Should we really? Forward. Luffy yelled predictably. Shouldn't we think over a plan for a second? Past Usopp screamed back at him. Though it was too late for that, they came too far to stop now. But the only person around them that they could see was a large, suspended cage placed right close to the shore. It was clearly a trap, though not everyone seemed to be thinking about that, since Kami and Papug both believed that everyone was on break and they were in luck. And when Usopp yelled at them that this was all a trap, they both were stunned at such a thing. And you wonder why you keep getting yourselves caught. Memory Usopp yelled at them. And that's why bad things kept happening to them. Current Nami sighed before she laughed a little fondly. Oh, Kami, Sanji sighed dreamily, staring happily at her. only wishing that she could hear his words, "You're so cute when you're in shock." "I'm here," Kami called from the figure in the cage. "I'm okay. So you don't need to worry." "Hachi, it's really you," Kami called thankfully, with a big smile on her face until she noticed that Hachi was covered head to foot in what had to be ink. There was so much of it that they couldn't see his face, or anything else. As soon as she saw him, Kami and Papug screamed in shock. "You're all black. What happened?" "Well," he said nervously, "this is kinda my own fault. Anyway, this is a trap, so hurry up and turn back. You know that I'm strong, right? It'll be fine. Just go." "And how did he expect to get out of there?" Current Zoro asked. "He just didn't want Kami there," Nami whispered to him. "But why did he cover himself in all that ink?" Brook asked curiously. "Why else? He didn't want us to recognize him," Sanji reminded him. "He must have thought that we'd beat him to a pulp if we knew that it was him," which he was right about. "Anyway, I guess that he'd rather take his chances with Macro's gang than with us. Though that's a smart choice if I think about it." "Would you have beaten him up?" Chopper asked. "Yes, if my precious Nami told me to," Sanji confessed, who had a much harder time forgiving Hachi over his part in what he did to Nami. But if she didn't want him to take revenge, then so be it. As they talked, Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Nami were all standing together at the front of the ship and looking at him suspiciously. Well, the three of them were anyway. Luffy just looked on ahead, not realizing anything was wrong. "That voice is really familiar, and then there's that unusual silhouette," Memory Zoro said darkly before he turned to Nami and asked, "Hey, Nami. What do you think?" She frowned, gazing long and hard, but even she didn't seem to be able to tell if that was really him. "There's something suspicious about him," she admitted. "What?" Luffy asked them in confusion. "Well, you can't blame him for not remembering right away," Present Frankie pointed out. "That happened a long time ago, right? Still, his memory can't be that bad," Current Nami told him, wishing that she could just forget about Arlong sometimes. "Well, we'll know if we ask him, right?" said Memory Sanji as he stepped forward and he called, "Hey. How's Arlong and the others doing?" "Huh, Arlong," Hachi answered. "Arlong. No, him, Chu, Karubi, and everyone else were caught by the Navy. I was the only one who managed to escape and now I'm living my old dream of running a food stand. I can't believe that he fell for that," Current Brook whispered to himself. "I can," Nami nodded as their past selves looked like how Brook felt. They just couldn't believe that he had fallen for a trick like that. He never was the sharpest pen on the table, if you know what I mean. "Arlong," Luffy whispered as the others sighed, not looking surprised that Luffy didn't remember. He blinked several times, as if he was trying to remember where he heard the name Arlong before, but after several long seconds, his eyes widened and his memory clearly came back. Until he finally screamed out, "So it was you all along, you damn squid." Hachi realized that he let his big mouth talk and screamed curses to himself for letting that slip. "So you're that damn squid that was with Arlong?" Luffy shouted at him. "You sell octopus balls and you're that Hachi." "That's what I thought," Present Nami couldn't help but whisper to herself as she heard Memory Usopp tell the others who Arlong was, and Hachi's part. "It's a small world after all. Hey squid, now that we know it's you, there's no way we'll save you." Luffy yelled, but as he calmed down, he asked him if his octopus balls really were the best in the world, which caused them all to roll their eyes. "Really, Luffy? You were willing to save a former enemy for food?" Current Sanji growled. "Why not?" Frankie asked, thinking of Alabasta, Skypia, and Thriller Bark. "He's overthrown overlords for a good meal. We're not talking about some random jerk," Sanji retorted, "but someone who caused a beautiful lady suffering." "Sanji, it's all right," Nami reminded him gently as Kami's eyes widened in surprise at the fact that they knew him and asked if they were friends, but Memory Zoro gave her such a deadly look that she screamed in fear as he snarled, "He's not our friend." "Looking really scary there, Zoro-san," Brook whispered, realizing just how much of a demon that Zoro looked there. "Damn it, Moss Head, don't take it out on Kami. How was she supposed to know?" Present-day Sanji yelled at him. "Shut up," Zoro retorted, fighting that guy was such a pain in the ass. "If I hadn't been beaten by Mihawk before, I'd have been able to take him out no problem." "Quit making excuses," Sanji yelled back. Memory Usopp was yelling that they should just turn the sails around and leave, and Kami turned to Nami pleadingly. Past Nami was looking torn at what to do. "Sorry, Kami," she apologized at last, "we never would have guessed that guy was your friend." "No way," Kami whispered as tears began to well up in her eyes. "Then, you won't help me save him after all." She then turned back to Hachi and called out his name desperately, but he was surprisingly on the Straw Hat's side. "Kami," he called encouragingly, "that's okay. Just turn back. This is a trap." "No," Kami called back, "I'll save you. Hachi, you're always saving us, after all." "Well, that damn octopus is lucky having such a beautiful lady worry about him like that," Current Sanji admitted almost enviously. Kami turned back to Papug, who jumped up to the railing after yelling at the rest of them that he couldn't believe that they trusted them in the first, and that they were no different than any other stupid pirate out there. "We didn't have to bring them this far," Current Zoro said, rolling his eye. Well, you can't blame them for being upset, Chopper pointed out as the two of them dove right into the water. But come on, Usopp said as their past selves looked down worriedly at the water, wondering if they were going to be okay. But just then, 3 fishmen popped out of the water, with her held tightly in their hands. There was a rather stupid-looking goldfish fishman with pop eyes, beige skin, and his black hair in a ponytail. He also had large eye sockets but incredibly small eyes with his long jaw and large lips, though a tiny mouth. He just looked all wrong. The second was an arowana fishman apparently. And he had a wild build with his pale, pink skin and scales on the back of his head. Though it was hard to see his face with the green fur coat over his head. And the largest one, their leader Macro, was some kind of eel fishman. He had large forearms with anchor tattoos and had a large lower lip and jaw so that when his mouth was closed, his lower lip stuck out so that they could see his fangs. Kami and Papug were screaming in terror as they struggled to try and get away. In memory, Usopp cried out, "Oh, come on. That's just pathetic." I took the words right out of my mouth. Current Usopp sighed as the 3 laughed as she continued to scream. At the sight of it all, Hachi was freaking out, trying to get out of the ropes he was tied in and get to her. Both Sanjis were furious at the sight of it all, and the past Sanji was growling out venomously, "Why you? Kami hasn't done anything. Can't we at least save her?" "Wait a minute, Sanji." Memory Nami called and he stopped as he looked at her. She turned back to look at Hachi, who was now banging his head up against the cage bars in a desperate attempt to free himself. And as he struggled, there were frustrated tears welling up in his eyes at the sight of being so helpless. The current Nami remembered that moment. She knew those tears all too well. They were the same kind of tears that she, herself, shed when she watched her mother die. She remembered the terrible helplessness, knowing that your family was in trouble and you weren't able to help them, especially when you knew that it was really your fault that they were in such danger to begin with. She hadn't forgiven Hachi at this point in time. Her memories of the pirate crew that he had been a part were still too fresh in her mind. She had mixed feelings raging inside her. However, she still hated Hachi just yet for his part in her mother's death, but at the same time, she saw how he was fighting to save Kami and she wasn't sure what she should do. It wasn't until she saw him break down crying, apologizing over and over again back at that auction house, trying to tell Luffy that he just wanted to make up for all the things that he had done to her while he was with Arlong, and even said that he had deserved to get shot after all that he had done. It wasn't until then did she forgive him. When she saw how remorseful he was, how hard that he tried to help them out, to make amends, her hatred for him just seemed to fade. She could never forgive Arlong for what he had done to her, but she could at least forgive Hachi. At long last her past counterpart sighed before she smiled. "Fine, let's save Hachi as well." They all looked at her worriedly, as if just wanting to make sure that she was okay with it as she looked back to the scene. "Hachi isn't really that bad," she went on. "Actually, he's harmless. And besides, we did promise Kami, too." And when she winked at them, Memory Sanji swooned, and Nami swan. That firm, determined appearance is just wonderful. "Were you really okay with that, Nami?" Current Chopper asked quietly. "Well, to be honest, no," Current Nami admitted. "It was more for Kami's sake than anything else since we did promise her. But I'm glad that we did in the end." Once that Memory Nami made it clear that she was okay with saving Hachi, she turned to Luffy, calling for him. Luffy took a deep breath. "Well," he began, "if you say so, then I guess there's no choice." He turned to look back at them, and they saw that there was a steady drip of drool from his mouth and his eyes formed into octopus balls from his desire to eat them. "Let's save the octopus guy, too." "Your eyes turned into octopus balls." Memory Usopp gasped. "I don't see how that's possible," the current Usopp added. "The same way that Nami's eyes turned to berry marks, and Sanji's turned into hearts." Chopper suggested. "Well, when you put it like that, yeah, I guess I can," he agreed as he nodded. "But what I want to know is if you really did forgive that guy for what he did to you," Present Frankie asked Nami. "Did you really forgive Hachi?" "Well, out of all of Arlong's men, he was by far the most understanding," she told him honestly. "I don't think I'll ever be able to forget, but at least I don't hate him anymore." Luffy jumped, stretching his arms out so that he was able to grab hold of both Kami and Papug as he soared over their heads, shocking Macro and his gang. Once he had hold of them and pulled them out of harm's way, he landed on Hachi's cage, startling him with his sudden appearance before he took another jump and landed on shore. Once he caught his breath, Luffy stood up with the 2 under each arm. "All right," he called out to them reassuringly, "I got him back." "Well, that was one less thing for us to worry about." Present Robin smiled as there were cries of anger from Macro, joy from Kami and Papug, and a grateful shout from Hachi. "Straw Hat," Hachi cried out thankfully, "thank you so much. I'm indebted to you." "Zoro," Luffy yelled, "cut the octopus's ropes in the cage." Memory Zoro smirked rather evilly at the order just as Hachi yelled out a warning to them that they had sprung the trap and that they were surrounded. Luffy obviously noticed this as well, for he set the 2 down and told them to get farther back, away from the danger. "Whether it's from the sea or the sky, we're ready for them," Luffy declared. "We're gonna beat 'em all. You tell him." Current Frankie cheered out, punching the air, and wishing that he could fight properly for a change. He was really getting sick of just watching, but their past selves were all grinning at those words, Kami and Papig's eyes widening in amazement as they all prepared for battle. Both Zoro and Brook had their swords drawn as Robin held up her arms. Sanji just took a long breath on his cigarette as Chopper changed into his heavy point and let out a loud roar. Nami and Usopp both held up their weapons as Frankie held up his arms, ready to throw some punches. Luffy looked ready to burst with excitement before he punched the air, screaming out, "You guys! Prepare for battle!" And that was when all hell broke loose. Hachi cried to Kami and Papug not to get in the way because it was too dangerous, and the flying fish riders came leaping out of the water, dive-bombing the Sunny. Luffy kept his eyes on the fish. Well, he said to himself, who's got the freshest fish here? What made him think that he could fly one of those things? Present Usopp asked in annoyance as he glared at Luffy, who eagerly watched the fish dive-bomb the Sunny, narrowly missing the sails and deck. The present-day Straw Hats jumped off from the Sunny and walked over so that they could get a full look at everything. Just then, however, Luffy seemed to have picked out his fish. He stretched out his arms and grabbed hold of the rider from the back and happily knocked him off so that he was at the controls. He's gonna regret that, Current Frankie sighed as he watched him fly around, and he was right. Memory Nami was shouting at them to pull the sails as the other riders began to drop bombs or cannonballs. Sanji had the task of kicking them all away so that they hit the water safely, but then one of the riders pulled out a baby transponder snail and they saw him talk to it. Though they couldn't hear what he was saying, they knew what it was about. Get ready for a blackout, Present Sanji sighed as the flying fish all dove back into the water, with Luffy still on the back of one of them. And the memory faded around them as soon as Luffy hit the water. But it didn't last long at all. Soon enough, they were back on Sunny's deck, with Luffy, Memory Chopper and Brook all lying on their backs on the deck, dripping wet and gasping for air. Memory Frankie and Nami were kneeling next to them, also soaking wet and obviously having just pulled them out of the sea. Really, what were you both thinking? Current Frankie laughed at them. That's got to be the worst possible way to help us out. Luffy least of all, you just give us more people to rescue. We're sorry, Chopper and Brook whispered in embarrassment. We weren't thinking. That's an understatement, Nami sighed as Memory Frankie yelled at Luffy. I'm sorry, Luffy gargled out before spitting up water and several small fish. Oh, and why'd you two try to save him? Past Frankie demanded as he turned to Chopper and Brook, both of whom had bumps on their heads. You're devil fruit users too. I'm sorry, Memory Chopper coughed. I seem to have troubled you, too, Past Brook gasped. That's not usually the thing you forget, Present Zoro sighed, rubbing the side of his head in annoyance. It's the thought that counts, Present Robin chuckled, remembering when Luffy jumped in to try and save Chopper back at that Omatsuri island. She liked to think of it as Chopper wanting to pay that action back, even if there was nothing that he could do. It's even worse when we have to save 3 idiots. Past Nami shouted as she slapped Brook. Don't make things harder than they already are. I'm truly sorry, Current Brook said, lowering his head in shame. He remembered how much he looked forward to helping everyone else out during a big event, and he ended up messing up big time. How could he do something like that? But his thoughts were interrupted when he heard Kami and Papug crying out for help from where they were on the dock. Looking up, the 3 from Marco's crew were gaining up on them and the 2 were terrified as Hachi was battering himself against the cage to escape again. But he didn't have to worry for long. At that moment, Memory Zoro jumped over and sliced right through the cage and ropes all with a single stroke, and they both fell with the Octo-Man right into the water. A second later, Hachi burst out, his arms held up over his head, looking ready to fight. Oh, thank you, Roronoa. Hachi yelled gratefully. You're a great guy, you know that. Why is he thanking me? Current Zoro said in annoyance as his memory self put his sword back and told him bluntly, it was Captain's orders, idiot. You just can't take a compliment, can you? Current Chopper asked him. It's the truth, Zoro answered him as Hachi glared at Macro and his crew, glad that he was able to take them out. And he was more than able to punch all 3 of them out and sent them flying off away from there. Once all 3 morons were taken care of, he went straight over to Kami and Papug, where they flew at him, wrapping their arms around him in a big group hug, which he was able to return by wrapping all 6 of his arms around them. Kami cried in joy as she hugged him, telling him how happy she was to see that he was okay, as Hachi apologized over and over for putting them through this. Ah, doesn't that give you a warm, fuzzy feeling inside you? Current Nami cooed, privately thinking that there had to be something going on between those 2. If nothing else, she suspected Kami had to have some kind of crush on Hachi. Don't worry about it, Hachi. Papug said, before he noticed something above him and screamed, ah. Hachi, behind you. It was one of the riders, armed with a sharp harpoon and was diving, ready to skewer him. Don't forget, the rider declared, that this is our territory. After all, the ones who caught you in the first place were us. The flying fish riders. And we should care because. Current Sanji asked in a bored voice just as Memory Zoro appeared, slashing at the rider and the fish so that they crashed into one of the huts nearby. Roronoa. Hachi cried as Kami gasped in awe. You need to follow yourselves, Memory Zoro said before he slowly turned his head to glance back at them. Just get back. You can leave this to us. You're so cool, Zoro. Current Chopper gasped, his eyes sparkling. As expected of you, Zoro-san. Brook added with as much admiration, a part of him wishing that he could use a blade even half that well. Sanji rolled his eyes at that, feeling sick at the praise that they were giving that idiot. Please, like that moss head could ever be cool, he said. Jealous, Mr. Nosebleed. Zoro smirked. In your dreams, he yelled back angrily. Still in the hug with the two, Hachi looked at Zoro, tears forming as he cried out, thank you for this, Roronoa. I'm really sorry about what happened back then. Memory Zoro looked confused for a second. Back then, he asked, I hurt you pretty badly with my six-sword style. He cried out mournfully. Please, he never even cut me. The present-day Zoro snapped, his fingers reaching up and touching the scar that Mihawk had given him back just before they arrived at Arlong Park. I could have taken him out easily if it wasn't for that wound. I still don't get how you thought that you could walk that injury off. Chopper yelled at him, remembering seeing all that blood himself. You didn't even land a single blow, as far as I can remember. Memory Zoro yelled at him angrily. Really? Hachi asked, thinking that over. Oh, that's right. Meanwhile, back on the Sunny, another one of the flying fish riders was preparing to dive toward the ship. Memory Usopp fired the cannon that he brought up to the deck, and gave him a direct hit. Though one of the riders was now swinging around a giant iron mace, looking ready to take someone's head clean off. Not that he got very far, Luffy and Memory Sanji took him out by jumping into the air and facing him head-on. Luffy inflated himself so that he looked like a giant beach ball, and stopping the fish dead in its tracks, as Sanji kicked the rider's face in. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Current Chopper cheered, jumping up and down excitedly as the rider fell and Luffy pile drove the fish onto the Sunny's deck. This'll be our dinner tonight, Luffy declared as he landed beside it. I never did have a chance to cook that thing, present Sanji stated as he watched Memory Robin raise up part of the fins and examined it in great interest. Just then, another rider dove at Memory Usopp, and ducked just in time when Nami gave him a warning. Thanks for that, Current Usopp said gratefully. Anytime, Nami smiled as Memory Usopp got up from where he tripped over the cannon. Now that I think about it, he said anxiously, there are a lot of them flying around here, how many of them do we have to beat before it ends? I wanna ride one, damn it. Luffy whined, staring up enviously, don't think I've given up just because what happened earlier. You think that after almost drowning would get through to him, present Zoro sighed irritably. He just doesn't learn, present-day Frankie added as Robin giggled. Give it up. Memory Nami yelled at him, I'm not gonna save you again. But just then, Brook's voice demanded, what's wrong with me? That's a good question, the current one said, shaking his head at his actions here. Just what was he doing? Everyone was fighting, and he was on the deck trying to breathe. Everyone was looking at Memory Brook, who was down on his hands and knees, looking ready to start beating his head in. What's up, Brook? Asked Luffy, wondering just was wrong. To think that my first real action as a member of the Straw Hat crew was to drown. Brook went on, though he was speaking more to himself than to all of them. It'd be such a disgrace if I didn't help you now. He suddenly stood up, drawing his sword. It is about time we reduce the number of those flying fish. Please observe, you were really cool here, Brook. Chopper told him. Thank you, Chopper-san, Brook said appreciatively, but I had to do something to make up for my mistake here. You helped out a lot, Zoro admitted, you took out most of the riders on your own. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Glad that I could be of some help. He said happily, and they watched as his past self jumped up into the air, as if he could suddenly fly, and earning several cries of amazement from the others as he almost flew at the nearest riders. Before they could register what was going on, he pulled out his violin and used his blade as a bow. He then began to play a soothing, gentle tune on it and then the memory darkened around them. What happened? Current Frankie asked startled as the memory came back almost at once. Luffy fell asleep, Nami sighed with a roll of her eyes. And they watched as the riders that weren't asleep in their seats, were being knocked off the flying fish and fell into the water. Memory Brook was also running across the ocean's surface, dodging and slashing at the flying fish who came near him. Again, you're really cool at how you can do that, Present Usopp whispered as he watched Memory Brook continue to run. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Part of the advantage of being so light. Brook said happily. I am nothing but bones after all. Luffy was leaning over the ledge and grinned as Brook went running by. He's pretty good, that Brook. He praised as he watched. Thank you for your kind words, Luffy-san. Past Brook laughed happily. Luffy then looked up to the sky and added, looks fun. Here I come. And before anyone could stop him, Luffy stretched out his hands and grabbed hold of the tail of one of the fish, hanging on as he was pulled up. Wait, Luffy, not again. Memory Nami cried after him, but too late, Luffy was already on the back, but what he didn't realize was that the rider and the fish were both still fast asleep. Oh, that's not good, Current Sanji said in annoyance as they flew overhead and before anything else could be done, the three of them, Luffy, the rider, and the flying fish, all ended up crashing right into one of the huts. That had to hurt. Chopper winced as he watched the smoke fly off from where they landed, in what looked like the largest of the huts. Yeah, and of all the places that he landed in, Zoro added, he had to crash right where their leader was. I swear, that luck of his. It's gonna kill us someday. Nami nodded sagely as they decided to just wait out here and calmly as the memory seemed to shift slightly and they were standing back at the shore again. At that moment, things got interesting as everything seemed to shake around them. As if something big and heavy was lumbering around from close by. They looked up in time to see Luffy bursting through the wall, just yards away from where Hachi, Kami, Papug, Zoro, and Brook were all there. Luffy. Memory. Zoro yelled in surprise. Run. Luffy yelled as he went running towards them, a huge guy is coming. Is it the Iron Mask? Papug cried out fearfully as Luffy stopped in front of the others, yelling that it was a huge masked guy riding a giant cow. That sounds so random, present Nami sighed, but by this point in time, I've learned that just about anything can happen out here with Luffy. We meet the most interesting people out here, Robin commented. A cow. Past Brook repeated in confusion, but his question was answered almost at once as Duval came bursting out of the building, destroying it and reducing what was once a house to nothing but a giant pile of splintered wood. Kami and Papug screamed as Hachi ran to stand protectively in front of them. The first thing they saw was a large bison with short legs and horns in contrast to the rest of his body. On his back was a special saddle that looked like a massive chair at first, but riding on that was a very large man who was at least 2.5 times a normal person's height. He had a muscular torso, but rather thin arms and legs. His head and shoulders were covered in thick armor, as well as a large leather jacket, black pants, boots, and a long fur cape, but his most noticeable feature was the large iron mask with long red tufts attached to it. What a loser, Current Sanji whispered darkly. Getting yourselves knocked down in drones. Roared Duval, his voice a little muffled from the mask. You guys ain't flies, you know. You're the flying fish riders. I didn't see him fighting a minute ago, Current Frankie said with a scowl, and they all groaned a little when they heard Memory Usopp ask, didn't you just destroy your own house? I gotta say, not the smartest guy I've ever met, Nami whispered as they all had sweat drop hanging around their heads. No, but he did end up helping us out a lot, Robin reminded her gently. We may have gotten off on the wrong foot, but it all worked out well in the end, and we owe them a great deal for all they've done for us. Fair enough, Nami nodded. I don't need this base anymore, Duval cried. As long as I can kill the Straw Hat Pirates. A few of his men landed on top of the water, apologizing for not taking them out already and that they'll lure them out to sea so that they can finish them there. But Duval wasn't interested in that, urging his bison, Motobaro, forward, and shook the ground so that Hachi, Kami, and Papug were knocked to the ground. I have no need for a fishman, a mermaid, or a glove, said Duval coldly. If you wanna run then just get lost. I'm a starfish, Papug yelled, but they didn't argue their case as they crawled away as fast as they could away from him. How dare he? Current Sanji growled, outraged by how Duval was treating Kami. At least he wasn't after her to sell her, Chopper reminded him quickly, just glad that they didn't have to worry about the three of them anymore, not yet anyway. I didn't enter the slave trading business because I wanted to, Duval said angrily, his massive head looking in the direction of his men. You guys understand that right? Of course, head. They all called in attention as Duval seemed to chuckle to himself as he gazed back at the sunny. What a great day this is. He said loudly, the man whom I wanted to kill so badly that I even saw him in my dreams, is right there. Is it just me, or does that seem to be a little obsessive stalkerish? Current Zoro said, looking over at the cook, whose eyes were twitching furiously. Shut up, he growled, sounding more like a wild animal than anything else at that moment. Like hell he'd ever want to be in a man's dream, he wanted nothing but the ladies to dream of him. I'm so grateful. I guess there is a god after all, huh? Duval went on, one day I was suddenly thrown into the depths of hell because of that man. Dramatic isn't he? Current Usopp said as his past self asked them nervously, hey, isn't he looking at us while he's saying that? Today, I'll kill ya right here, even if I die myself. Duval continued just as dramatically. Pirate, Black Leg, Sanji. Memory Sanji's eyes widened in surprise when he heard his name. And as Duval glared through his mask, a single eye opening up so that they could see it, he hissed, I really wanted to meet ya. Oh crap. One of the riders yelled, the head's really pissed off. Over no good reason. Current Sanji yelled out furiously, still unable to believe that this guy blamed him for that stupid poster. If it were up to him, he sure as hell never have a picture like that. Me? Memory Sanji questioned, looking at him in bafflement. That guy wants to kill me. Who doesn't? Current Zoro asked, coughing a little at that. And I'm gonna kill you one of these days. Sanji yelled at him furiously. Hey, bro, Memory Frankie said, glancing at Sanji's past counterpart. Who the hell is that guy? It seems like he's got some kind of grudge against you. Could it be something that happened when you were working at the Bharati? Past Nami suggested. Try to remember, Sanji. I wish, the current Sanji muttered to himself. If it's something from that far back, Memory Sanji stated as he began to count down on his fingers as he remembered all the things that he must have done. There have actually been a number of people I've pissed off. That full-body guy, being one of them. Current Robin asked politely and he gave a little laugh. Maybe, he confessed, but it was jerks like him who deserved that beating. Well, Chef Zeph did say that it wasn't the first rampage you went on, Brooke pointed out politely. Dude, just how the hell did you all stay in business? Usopp whispered in amazement. Let him shoot you. What can I say? You probably deserved it. Memory Usopp, hooking the cook's neck with his arm as Chopper clung to Sanji's front and nodded fiercely, looking ready to cry. Quit playing dumb, black leg. Duval roared out furiously. We're talking about something recent here. And without another word, he held up a bazooka that began to fire miniature harpoons right at the Sunny. They were all forced to duck as the harpoons rained down and embedding themselves into the wood. He didn't have to do that, current Usopp whispered. There is something seriously wrong with him, Sanji agreed with a wise nod. But if it's something recent, then I'm even more confused. His past self said, getting back up. But that was when they noticed that there was something seriously wrong about the harpoons. Where they landed, they were giving off a strange purple haze, and parts of the grass and wood around them were starting to rot and corrode around them. That was when Duval informed them all that they were each poisoned, so that if they so much as grazed them, they'd be dead in just 3 minutes. He then reloaded and fired the harpoons again, and this time he almost hit Memory Nami, who shrieked and fell. Sanji jumped over, kicking them away from her before he glared at Duval again. I'm telling you. I don't know you. Who the hell are you? I'm gonna kill ya and her crew. Duval laughed, going to town with his poisoned harpoons. Damn it, if he had such a grudge against me, why not face me like a man? Current Sanji demanded. There was no need to take his stupid grudge on Nami. But those on the shore were forced to duck behind some of the destroyed pieces of the buildings to avoid getting seen. Luffy and Zoro were watching the scene from behind part of a destroyed wall, and they went over to see what they were talking about. I saw what was under his mask, they heard Luffy say to Zoro, who looked at him in surprise. Really? He asked, who is it? Luffy pulled his hat back up onto his head as he added, don't be surprised. You've seen his face too. I still can't believe that Duval's face was actually. Current Frankie whispered as Brooke laughed. I mean, who would have seen that coming? Well, it's bad enough that he has to look just like the cook, Zoro reasoned. What was that, Moss Head? Sanji yelled at him, practically foaming at the mouth. You need to get your hearing checked, Zoro answered coolly. But before the two could fight, Luffy ducked out from his cover and went running straight up to the giant bison. With a single kick, he knocked Duval's mask clean off his head and it hit the ground so that no one could miss what his true face was. Very well, said Duval, not sounding the least bit upset about losing his iron mask. Go ahead and take a good long look at my scarred face. I still can't believe it, current Nami whispered in awe. That's something that you don't see every day, Brooke nodded as their past selves were staring at Duval in shock. Each one of them seemed unable to say anything, and Memory Frankie was sobbing when he fully understood what this was about. But it was Memory Sanji, who seemed to be stunned at what he was seeing, as if he thought that this had to be some kind of dream or bad joke. Once he came to that realization, something in Memory Sanji seemed to snap as he bit his cigarette in half, his teeth grinding together as if he was about to explode from anger and was fighting to keep it all inside. I wonder how something like this happens, Present Chopper asked in amazement, as both Frankie continued to cry. Who would have guessed? The world is a strange and mysterious place, Robin reminded him, looking close to laughing. Despite however angry it made Sanji, you couldn't deny that it wasn't funny. I've been waiting for this day, Duval growled, reaching into his leather jacket for something. I resolved to set out to sea to kill you, but it wasn't easy trying to hunt you down. He then pulled out Sanji's poorly drawn wanted poster. After all, your true face and your poster don't match. Thank God for that, current Sanji sighed in relief, his hand up to touch his face. Even if Marines and bounty hunters run into ya, they wouldn't notice ya. Duval went on, oh, but they would have thought they'd recognized him. You know he's right, Present Usopp pointed out. No matter what, you don't have to worry about Marines or bounty hunters. Like hell, Sanji yelled out indignantly. What's the point of being a pirate if you aren't even known for it? The flying fish riders were sobbing and wiping tears from their eyes, as if they could feel their boss's pain. But they had every right to, for their leader's face looked just like Sanji's poorly drawn poster. Every little piece of him was an exact duplicate of the drawing except for his eyebrow, which swirled downward instead of upward like their Sanji. And then, Duval continued, as tears fell from his eye, when they'd find ya, they'd say, I found you. Black leg Sanji. And then I'd tell him, he slammed the poster down and finished yelling out, and then I'd say, I dunno anyone like that. I ain't even a pirate. Again, how is this my fault? Present Sanji demanded furiously. Just because that moron wasn't smart enough to change how he looked doesn't make it my fault. Well, he's got to blame someone for it, Brooke pointed out. Oh, who asked you? Sanji demanded hotly as his past self seemed to lose his temper completely. He had his fists clenched tightly as the fire burned his body, his eyes flaming with the heat of his rage. Quit screwing with me, he bellowed out. That face, Memory Nami whispered in stunned disbelief, can something like that really happen? Apparently so, current Robin shrugged, unable to hold back the giggles. Amazing, past Chopper croaked out as past Sanji continued to burn behind him. I never thought that there'd be someone in this world who looked exactly like that drawing on Sanji's wanted poster. Black leg Sanji. Duval cried as tears fell. This is all your fault. He's lucky that he's just a memory here. The present-day Sanji roared as his past self snapped and went running to the other side of the ship and dove in. But Duval wasn't even noticing as he went on tragically. Do you realize how frightening it was, suddenly being targeted by bounty hunters? Why'd I suddenly have to be chased by the Navy HQ? Why'd all those big-name bounty hunters start hunting me? Why? You know, I can't help but feel bad for the guy, Brook said as Frankie sniffled next to him. I mean, he didn't ask for any of that to happen. But it's not my fault that his face looked like that. Sanji yelled, sounding like a broken tone dial. Look, he's just an idiot for not thinking about getting a haircut or something. Well, he shouldn't have anything to complain about now with his face right. That was a nice thing for you to do, Sanji-san, Brook told him. Yeah, though I'm kinda regretting it, Sanji confessed, with how much he went on about it. Well, if his face looked like that his whole life and suddenly he's handsome, can you really blame him? Usopp asked. If nothing else, you could go into plastic surgery if it turns out being a cook doesn't work, Frankie teased once he calmed down from his tears. Don't even joke like that. Sanji said, I am a cook. And I always will be. A crappy cook, Zoro nodded, but a cook. You son of a, Sanji snarled by the time his past self pulled himself out of the sea and was on the dock as Luffy glanced back at him. Saul because you decided to become a pirate, and become famous. Duval yelled tearfully, Dad I had to go into hiding, fearing the bounty hunters every single day. Memory Sanji ran towards him as Duval yelled out, what did I do to you? Gimme my life back, but Sanji had enough. He had jumped and gave him a hard kick right in his face so that it gave him a heavy nosebleed, worthy of one of Sanji's own. Like I care, he roared as Duval sat there dazed for a moment before he snapped out of it and gave him a hard glare. That's cold, bro, present Frankie whispered. Like he doesn't deserve it. Sanji demanded bitterly. He sure as hell wasn't going to take the blame just because this guy was ugly. If he's got such a grudge with him, then he should be able to face him without getting the ladies involved just because he's got issues. Wade I mean, like I care. Duval demanded wrathfully, if y'all ain't gonna take responsibility for this, then who will? Just blame the world government, current Zoro shrugged, works for me. Shut up, past Sanji yelled back, I'm more pissed off about that poster than anyone. But you two look exactly like each other. Hachi spoke up as they all stared at them. Like two peas in a pod, Memory Zoro added. At the look on Sanji's face Memory Brook fell forward onto all fours and was laughing his head off. And of course, the current Sanji gave their Brook a hard kick to the head. Sanji-san, why? Brook moaned as he lay on the ground with a large lump on his head. Rather than answer, he pointed to his past self who snapped at Memory Brook, Brook. I'm so gonna kick the crap out of you when this is all over. Since I've conveniently forgot all about that here, you get to feel it now, he said, clearly in a bad mood. Damn, Frankie whispered as Chopper went around to examine the large bump on Brook's head, despite the fact that he was nothing but bones. Well, Sanji, said Luffy, holding up a hand in farewell, I guess we'll go on without ya. I'm behind that order, current Zoro nodded with a smirk. And I'm all for leaving you behind. Sanji yelled back at him. Meanwhile his past self yelled at Luffy, are you saying that you think this is my fault? He then turned back to Duval and added, if you don't want to look like the wanted picture, then how about trying to change your hairstyle or beard? There are plenty of things you could have just changed. They all seemed to be thinking that idea over as if they hadn't thought of that. And then Duval and the other flying fish riders pounded their fists into their palms. So I could have done that? Duval asked in amazement. You mean didn't think of that sooner? Memory Sanji roared in disbelief. You morons. I ain't no moron. Duval yelled back. You could have fooled me, present Usopp whispered to himself as Duval began to tell them his life story. How he ran a humble criminal outfit in a countryside near these parts and that he made a living by terrorizing the locals. But then one day, high-powered Marines showed up looking for him. But he was able to get away, though carried the scars. He couldn't show his face and was forced to wear that iron mask and told him that he ruined his life and that if he didn't like it, then Sanji could try to kill him himself. Oh, it was tempting, present Sanji admitted, his eye twitching a little after hearing such a stupid story. His past self however just seemed to disappear for a moment and suddenly he reappeared right in front of Duval, his hand right at his throat. Duval screamed in shock, croaking out that he was being killed before Memory Sanji snarled. And you could almost see poison dripping from his mouth, the venom was so great, these stupid accusations of yours. Why do you even have to put Nami and Robin in danger? What about the rest of us? Present Chopper cried out, we were being fired at too you know. Yeah, why don't you ever ask how we are? Usopp demanded at once. Because my heart belongs to the ladies. Sanji proclaimed as if it was obvious. And so, the rest of you can just suck it. You jerk. Usopp yelled at him, wanting to give him a good bashing over the head for that. So dat ship and dat crew dat made you a famous pirate. Duval croaked out, still glaring at him despite the fact that he was at Sanji's mercy. Of course I'd want my revenge on him. Ya guys should all die. And then he pulled out the bazooka again and fired the harpoons right in front of him. Left with no other choice, Memory Sanji let go and jumped out of the way, dodging them in midair. Duval suddenly pulled out a baby transponder snail and called for the other riders to get into formation, and they found out just what he was talking about. Apparently their plan was to get them into the air in the first place. After Memory Sanji took out several of the riders who attacked him, 2 others dove on either side of him and trapped him in a large steel net like they were fishing. Current Sanji was shaking his head, unable to believe that he had been that stupid to let himself get trapped that easily. He tried to blame it all on his anger, but he knew it was because he wasn't taking these guys seriously. Well, he supposed he went through this to keep him humble. He suddenly remembered who it had been who saved him underwater, and he was fighting hard to hold back a nosebleed. He was able to forget about that though when the 2 riders dove into the water with Sanji right along with them. Luffy stared in shock before he began to run to the edge, looking ready to jump in as well, but Memory Zoro ran around and tried to hold him back. Again, he's just going to cause more problems than solve them if he had jumped in, Nami sighed as she watched Zoro try to restrain him. Damn it, Luffy cursed, trying to throw him off. Hang on, Sanji. I'll save you. Don't go in there yourself, you idiot. Zoro barked, you'll drown. Let me go. Thanks Moss Head, I didn't know you cared about me, Sanji sneered at him. I personally hope that you drowned, Zoro retorted, but if I didn't say that, then Luffy would have dove in after you. Not sure why he cared so much. Asshole, Sanji hissed to him. Wait, Hachi cried and he went running forward. Humans are too slow, you'll never reach him in time. Leave this to me, fool, said Duval with a laugh. Not even a fishman can catch up in time. The flying fish are the fastest animals in the sea. And the riders riding them all have air canisters. So they can stay underwater as long as they like. That guy doesn't stand a chance. The next time that Black Leg resurfaces, he's gonna be dead. Well, lucky for you that we had Kami on our side, Present Usopp stated. Oh, it was worth almost drowning just to be in sweet Kami's arms, Sanji sighed dreamily as Kami looked at the water with a determined look on her face. I could have sworn that I had died and gone to heaven. Really? Is that all that you were thinking about? Usopp yelled at him. Chopper, Nami whispered as she crouched down to speak to him, did you ever try making that medicine to fix his brain? I tried, he shrugged, but I told you before back at Eni's lobby that he might be beyond help. What's that? Luffy roared in fury as Duval continued to laugh. At that moment however, a familiar voice cried out, it's okay. And as they looked, they spotted Kami having just thrown off her backpack and dove straight into the sea. Kami, Memory Nami called out worriedly. Hey, cowboy, said Papug to Duval, sounding strangely confident again. It seems you forgot someone here. The flying fish are certainly faster than even fishmen. They're in a top class among sea creatures. They really are something. However, the creatures at the very top of that list are the mermaids. In this great sea, there are no creatures that can outrun a mermaid underwater. Yo-ho-ho-ho, that's true, Brook agreed as he remembered longingly of those beautiful dancing mermaids during the feast at the palace. Oh, he had truly got a glimpse of what heaven must be like. She was fast, Nami nodded, she got us out of the Ryugu palace in a flash. Which reminds me, Usopp said with a frown, why the hell did you leave us there like that? You could have helped us out, you know. I wanted to meet Jimby, she shrugged, besides, I knew that you all would be just fine. We almost drowned, he yelled, remembering how he was wrapped with chains and hanging from that cage. Well, that's not my fault, she responded with a shrug as he glared at her. You should have tried harder to fight back. Is Kami really that fast? Luffy asked Papug in surprise. Actually, Papug replied with a slight laugh in his voice. If she hadn't been spacing out most of the time, no one could ever catch her. Oh, like he's any better, Current Zoro said. From what I've seen, he gets himself eaten along with her half the time. I see. Luffy smiled in understanding before he yelled to the water, Kami. Take care of Sanji. She did, Current Sanji sighed dreamily, almost able to smell her fragrant scent. But before he could focus too much on it, dozens of flying fish riders burst out of the water, each one carrying what looked like part of a rope or chain, but they saw right away what it was attached to. Something large and heavy was rising up, out of the sea. How'd they get something that big? Present Zoro asked interested as they watched as a ship's anchor, the largest anchor they've ever seen, rise out of the water and was now positioned right over the Sunny. I mean, who could even make a ship big enough to fit that? A giant ship, Frankie offered with a tilt of his head as he watched the riders get ready to drop it. Of course, there was no way that he was going to sit back and let them crush his baby. Using the paddles or the coup de burst though would have taken too long, so his past self ordered Usopp to stand by the bow as he declared that he would use their emergency secret weapon. Where did you come across with something so dangerous? Present Nami couldn't help but ask him. Hey, I don't ask you your secrets, right? He asked with a satisfied grin. Out of their past selves, only Robin seemed to be calm as she smiled interestedly up at the anchor right over their heads. Just as the riders let go of the ropes that held the anchor up, Memory Frankie caused Sunny's man to start spinning around and around like a giant propeller. But they didn't have time to register what was going on. Emergency evacuation secret weapon, Memory Frankie called out. Chicken Voyage. You think that you could have come up with a cooler sounding name than that, present-day Zoro muttered, but no one was listening to him as the Sunny was suddenly shot backwards. The wind from the spinning main was so great that it was able to dodge the falling anchor, missing it by a hair, and escaped without a scratch. Sunny's so amazing, Chopper cried out in amazement. Of course she is. Frankie laughed, thumping his chest proudly. What do you expect? This super guy built her after all. But that wasn't the end of it. Sunny had only just begun to show off what she could do. Memory Frankie yelled at Usopp to get inside the figurehead, and once he did, Sunny's mouth opened up to reveal the cannon inside. Oh, this is gonna be so sweet. Present Frankie laughed as Luffy and both Choppers had their eyes sparkling at the sight of it all. You could have warned us what you were gonna do, you know, Zoro criticized him as the cannon's head was beginning to blow brightly. You almost blew us away along with the island. But Memory Frankie was looking like he just couldn't hold back the surprise that he had planned for them all. He then shouted out, Gown Cannon. At his command, a great burst of light shot out of the cannon, one so great that it obliterated everything in its path. The entire village practically wiped out from that one hit. Those still on the dock were forced to hang on for dear life as the attack bathed everything in that blinding light and the buildings were all reduced to rubble faster than blinking. My first time firing that, current Usopp sobbed a little in joy. That was so amazing. As astonishing as always, Frankie-san. Brooke said in awe, my eyes would pop out if they could. Though I don't have eyes anymore, yo-ho-ho-ho. You're so cool, Frankie. Chopper cheered and Frankie grinned back as he posed and they continued to cheer. Well, at least it took care of most of those riders for us, Nami whispered as the boys continued to drool over the cannon. Though, I don't see why they think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Just let them enjoy themselves, Robin told her as the cannon finished firing, and Cannon's head was glowing red hot from the force that it gave off. Memory Zoro shielded his eyes as he felt a bright aura emanating Luffy, whose twinkling eyes were flooded with tears. You're way too impressed, damn it, he told him, as Luffy continued to cry. The boys back then were all celebrating and praising the Gown Cannon, as the current Straw Hats were doing. Zoro, Sanji, and the women didn't interrupt as they let them dancing and enjoy themselves however. Memory Frankie took a long sip of cola and told them all just how it worked. That attack used up 3 barrels of cola alone, and then he had to fire a coup de burst from the end to ensure that they didn't get blow backwards, since it used up so much cola that they could only use it in case of emergencies. And now we have the General Frankie ready to kick some ass. Frankie added proudly, thinking of his latest toys and now itching to drive around on his new bike. A few seconds later, Kami finally burst out of the sea with Sanji, but was crying out for help, telling them that as soon as she saved him, he started losing a lot of blood from a serious nosebleed. And when they looked, they saw his head was laying between her breasts and they groaned at the sight of it all. He's fine. Memory Usopp called in irritation, if he dies like that, then just let him die. At least he'll die happy, past Nami nodded in dark agreement. How rude of you all. Present-day Sanji yelled at them all. I can't help it if I'm captured by the spell that women have over me. Hang in there, Sanji. Kami cried out anxiously. Is this heaven? He croaked out, spewing out water and blood. I wish, current Sanji sighed as they all felt sweat drop hanging around their heads as they watched. Duval was looking outraged that his plan didn't look, but at that second, Luffy walked forward to get his attention. Hey, Luffy called up to him. Looks like you've lost a lot of guys. Why, you? Duval snarled, now looking like he was about to burst into flames himself at that moment. Then, I guess you should learn how terrifying Motobaro is. Up till today, I've lost count of how many fools have been impaled by his giant horns. He's kidding, right? Present Usopp asked, looking at the short horns as Motobaro grunted and pawed the ground, as if ready to charge. They must have been pretty pathetic marines, current Zoro nodded. They say that his horns have even managed to destroy village dams. Duval bragged, and they couldn't help but wonder if he was just saying that in an effort to sound more impressive than he really was. Put him in a cage and he'll break out. Duval continued, the only reason I've been able to escape from the Marines all this time is because of this guy's horns. They call him the heart-smashing horns. And the horns seemed to glint in the light as Motobaro huffed, looking ready to prove it. Just charge already so that Luffy can take him out, Present Frankie whispered as Luffy pounded his fist into his hand and cracked his knuckles, proclaiming that he'll stop them. His words seemed to just infuriate Duval even more. Go Motobaro, he ordered. Motobaro's mighty hooves thundered as he charged at Luffy, pointing his sharp hooves downwards. Watch out, Luffy. Memory Chopper cried out in warning, but at that moment, Motobaro was almost on top of Luffy, prepared to impale him, only to be stopped as Luffy raised his hands and caught hold of the bison's large nose and held him back, stunning both Duval and Chopper. I don't see how they could be dangerous if they're so high up, Robin said as she watched Motobaro continue to try and press forward, but Luffy held him back as he glared at the bison in the eyes with a fierce intensity. There's no point in us even fighting, he said seriously, and at that moment they all felt the shockwave, though it was slight, like a vibration from an echo. Yet it was more than enough to cause Motobaro's eyes to widen in shock and sweat form on his shaggy body. So this is. Brook gasped, understanding at last what was going on. Conqueror's Haki, Zoro nodded with a smirk. It's not really that big of a surprise though, is it? Haki grows with experience. After Enies Lobby and Thriller Bark, it's only natural, right? But I thought that Luffy didn't know it here, Chopper asked as Motobaro slowly began to back away in fear. I think that he's using it subconsciously, Robin explained when Duval was asking what was wrong to the giant cow. Haki usually awakens gradually, and with how strong he had gotten after all that's happened, it all makes perfect sense. Though he could use it, he didn't know how to control it by this point in time. What's going on with the cow? Memory Zoro asked as, suddenly, the bison began to thrash around until it managed to knock Duval off his back. And then it stumbled away and finally collapsed yards away. There was silence all around until past Nami called, Luffy. What did you do? He looked back at her, as if wondering why she was talking to him and answered, I didn't do anything. As Duval began to sob over what happened to his beloved pet, their past selves seemed to be trying to figure out just what was going on. You know, Sanji sighed, it really is sad that we still didn't know anything about Haki here. I mean, we were this close to the New World and we had no clue. Well, it's a good thing we know about it now, Brook said seriously, after all, the New World is full of them. It's almost a requirement to have at least one of the 3 forms of Haki to survive here, Zoro nodded in agreement. At his words, Usopp and Chopper both seemed to turn pale. Zoro. Chopper cried out, can you teach me? I can try, he offered, but it's not exactly something that you can learn overnight, you know. Why ask him? Sanji demanded, I'm a much better teacher than he is. Because you'll be busy cooking food for Nami and Robin. Usopp offered quickly and Sanji seemed to become distracted at that wonderful thought. Anyway, we'll see, Zoro promised Chopper, whose eyes lit up at the thought of being able to predict a person's actions in battle, or create that kind of invisible armor. Why you? Duval snarled as he turned back to Luffy. Damn you, Straw Hat. Luffy was looking ready to take him out once and for all this time, but before he could, Memory Sanji's voice spoke up, hey, wait a minute, Luffy. They glanced back to see that he had recovered from his nosebleed and had climbed back onto the shore, and thrown off his jacket as he began to walk over to where they all were. Sanji, Luffy commented, glad to see you're alright. Thanks to the Angel of the Sea for saving me. Present Sanji sang out joyfully and Nami gave him a hard hit to the back of the head to get him to shut up. Yeah, Memory Sanji replied. I'll end this stupid argument filled with these pointless accusations myself. Finish it. Duval demanded in outrage, Black Leg. As long as you keep living as a pirate, I'll never find peace. I'm the one who's sick of these accusations. Shut up, Present Sanji said deadly. I don't want to see that stupid poster face any more than you do. It shouldn't even exist in real life. You know, couldn't they get anyone in the Marines to draw right? Even if they couldn't get a picture. Brook asked wondering. I always thought that Marines had issues if they think that stupid poster looks anything like me. Sanji yelled out. Well then, you should just die. Duval fired his poison harpoons at Sanji once again, but he was ready for them. He jumped over the flying weapons before he kicked Duval right in the eyes. And again he kicked his face over and over. But he wasn't stopping, he kept kicking every inch that he could reach, even as Duval started to beg him to stop. Covering his face in pain, Memory Sanji just smirked evilly at him as he finished up with, parage, shot. With that last kick hitting him dead in the center of his face, Duval flew back several yards and crashed right into one of the destroyed huts, and this time he didn't get back up. The memory ended with Sanji standing there, looking pissed off and merciless. Taste the classiness of my finishing attack and end your misery. Dude, that was harsh, Frankie said with a wince. If I didn't know what you had done, I would think that you were trying to kill him, Sanji-san, Brook said timidly. Oh, he was asking for it, Sanji retorted grumpily. Besides, he was happy. It was all that I could do to shut him up. Though I think that just made him even more irritating than before. The next memory came up and they were back at the Sunny, with the Riders' base nowhere in sight, and a smaller ship that was stationed right next to them. It was about the size that Mary had been, with her bow designed to resemble a typical food stall, with the sides looking like large octopus tentacles, with several bar stools set up in front of a large window where there were Hachi was working as fast as his 6 arms could go. At the sight of all the food, some of them had their stomachs roaring in hunger and their mouths were drooling. Hachi was happily making tray after tray of delicious-looking food, still steaming hot and the sauce practically melting off. Luffy, Sanji, Usopp, Chopper, and Brook were sitting there at the chairs and eating so fast that they weren't sure if they were even bothering to chew or even taste the food. Oh, I'm dying here. Current Usopp groaned out, his hands over his belly, and almost tasting the wonderful food on his tongue. Sanji, can't you make something for us here? Chopper whined out. Shut up, you two are getting to be as bad as Luffy, Sanji said. Look, I promise that once this whole mess is over, then I'll make a big feast for us when we get back to the sunny, alright? Just hold on until then. They moaned out loudly at that, not sure if they could wait that long, especially after seeing Luffy stuffing himself silly. I can't stop, Luffy said, his mouth so full that it was a wonder he was able to say anything at all. I can't stop, these octopus balls are the best. He had already cleared several trays of the food, and even tried to take some that were still cooking on the stove before he burned his hand and yelled in pain. Maybe that will teach him not to steal from everyone else, current Sanji muttered. He's been a little bit better from taking food from others' plates than he had been 2 years ago, Robin pointed out. Nami blinked at that before she said, you know what? I think that you might be right. Though he still does it, Sanji pointed out. And his appetite has gotten a lot bigger in just 2 years. Yes, but I wonder what changed, Robin said to herself thoughtfully. Once again, she was wondering about what it had been that changed Luffy. She noticed just subtle changes in him, personality-wise, he was as he had always been, but at the same time he wasn't. She wasn't sure if that was such a good thing anymore. Everyone else was still watching them enjoy their food, and laughed a little when Memory Chopper had so much packed into his cheeks that he couldn't speak. As for Brook, he was eating so much that he was joking around that it felt like his stomach would burst at any moment even though he no longer had one. But Hachi never once complained. Using his 6 arms, he was cooking the octopus balls on the grill with great speed so that they were coming out by the dozen. After he poured the batter, he would take the ones that were ready off, and serve them in a tray before he passed them to Kami and Papug, who would pour the sauce and toppings before they passed them out. Feel free to eat as much as you like. It's free today, Hachi told them sincerely, it's our way of thanking you for saving us. My kind of reward, Present Usopp said, his hand on his stomach as it growled rebelliously as Kami held out several more trays. This went on for several more minutes before Hachi stopped for a moment and was looking at someone over at the other end of the ship. He suddenly seemed nervous and asked awkwardly, so, what does she think? Nami, I mean. Yes, I suppose that he would be most concerned with you, Present Robin said as she walked forward to stand next to Nami, a comforting hand on her shoulder. They were standing behind the others so that they couldn't hear them talk. And he worked really hard to make sure that he was as helpful as possible. I know, she confessed with a smile as Luffy and Sanji both stopped in the middle of their eating, as if afraid that they said anything, something would explode. I was still not ready to forgive him yet. But I was trying. Robin smiled at her and said, you really are a kind person, Nami. She laughed a little and smiled. I'm glad, in a way, she confessed, I mean, it felt good to be able to let go of some of that anger that I had. To be honest, up until this whole situation, every time I thought of Fishmen, I always thought of Arlong. I was really nervous about going to Fishman Island, scared that there were others like that. Does that make me a terrible person? Not at all, Robin reassured her. I think that it was very brave of you. I know that after everything that Arlong and the others put you through, it's only natural to hold on to some resentment. I don't think that I ever fully let go of it though until after I met with Jimby, she admitted as she watched. Because, for the longest time, I thought that he was the one responsible for setting Arlong loose in the East Blue. I can't tell you how great a relief it was to find out that he was innocent there. She sighed before she smiled again. More than anything, I'm glad to know that not all fishmen think like Arlong. Robin smiled proudly at her as she took her hand. And don't you feel better for that? Nami laughed. I do, she answered. And you know what? It feels really good, like a weight's off my shoulders or something. But her past self didn't share that same feeling. She was sitting as far back as she could, as if she didn't want to get too close to Hachi, and there was an angry expression on her face. But also some confusion, as though she was trying to figure out what she was supposed to do now. Hachi looked extremely uncomfortable as he looked at her. So, he called to her, rather nervously. Is it good? Nami didn't answer right away, didn't even look at him for a few seconds. It's not like I'll forgive you just because of this, you know, she informed him. Of course not. Hachi cried at once, waving all 6 of his arms in the air anxiously. That's not what I meant at all. I just wanted to know what you think of it. Honestly, I really thought that you were going to give him a good talking to, current Usopp said to her timidly. I mean, I was half expecting you to lose it and beat him up, it was so tense. Her past self didn't say anything for a long moment as she tried one more ball and took her time answering. But soon, she looked up and gave him a tiny, but gentle, smile as she said, it's really good. At her words, Hachi burst out crying in joy and everyone seemed to heave out sighs of great relief at her words as Hachi asked, really? You mean it? And though the air was still rather tense, though Nami had only said that his food was tasty, it seemed to be more than good enough for him as he cried and continued to work twice as hard. You sure made his day, Zoro nodded as Hachi continued to cry, with Kami looking at him rather curiously to why he was acting like that. Did Kami and Papug ever know? Present Frankie couldn't help but ask. No, Nami admitted, but I think that after we last saw them on Sabayati, sometime during the last 2 years, they found out. Remember, she was surprised when she saw that we knew Hachi, but when we talked with Jimbei back at Fishman Island, she didn't seem to be that surprised about hearing when we talked about Arlong and Hachi's part in it. I suppose that it's only natural, Robin commented. But Hachi really did change himself around, Chopper pointed out. Even if he hasn't been punished for it. Sanji asked curiously. Oh, I think that he's still haunted by the things that he's done, Robin spoke up simply. How can you judge someone else, when you know that you're just the same? She had done a lot of things in her past throughout the years, and most of which she wished that she could forget. She could see that Hachi must be carrying around a lot of guilt about the things that he had done. She wondered what made him really join with Arlong. As far as she could tell, he had willingly joined a band of fishmen who hated humans even though that he was friends with Rayleigh and Shaki. That proved that he never truly supported Arlong's ideals, and even Nami had vouched that Hachi had been one of the Arlong pirates and that they should help him. She supposed that it was really Arlong's influence that caused him to act the way that he did. Maybe Hachi realized that once he was free and on his own. Once he escaped the Marines, maybe he began to see his actions from the outside. And maybe when he met Kami and Papug, he really began to understand the things that he had done, how much suffering he had caused while he was with Arlong. She knew better than anyone to know that everyone deserved a second chance if they really wanted it. Alright you guys, Hachi called out loudly, a new spring in his step, eat as much as you can. There's plenty to go around. Yeah, keep cooking, Luffy declared, I'm gonna eat it all. And he nearly did too, current Nami laughed, in fact, all of us did now that I think about it. Hey, we worked up an appetite back there, Frankie said as he posed. We super deserved it. Octo Man, past Sanji spoke, referring to Hachi, tell me, how do you make this sauce? I've never had anything like that. The sauce, Hachi repeated, glancing around as if he was afraid that someone else might be listening, before he whispered, it comes from a secret recipe used long ago by a legendary octopus ball chef. And that was when he told them his story of how he came to run this stall. Shortly after Arlong Park fell and they were brought onto a marine prison ship, he had managed to escape and dove straight into the sea before anyone noticed. By the time that the Marines realized that he was gone and had decided to simply go home to Fishman Island since there wasn't anything left in the East Blue for him. He had several adventures after that, like removing the hook from a panda shark. I wonder if that was the same one who tried to eat Yosaku. Chopper asked curiously as he remembered how Yosaku ended up bursting right through the Barati's wall while he was in the mouth of that thing. Well, maybe, Brooke said, thinking it over, but that was certainly kind of him to help it out. Hachi then went on to tell them how the shark gave him a little bit of food in gratitude, and he gave it to a stranded islander, who then gave him a ring and he gave it to the goldfish princess for her wedding. To thank him, they gave him a trident from the goldfish kingdom, and that was the weapon he used to kill a sea king who was trying to eat a sea boar. You know, if I first heard this story before I came to the Grand Line, I would swear that he's making this all up, Usopp said incredulously. Yo-ho-ho-ho, he was certainly making a lot of friends by these good deeds, Brooke said happily. Good for him, Frankie nodded approvingly. And during the story, Hachi added that was when the boar spit out Kami and Papug from its stomach and that was how they met. Kami laughed a little at the memory, telling them that she wanted to go on an adventure and left home for a while, and that had been the first monster that she had been eaten by, and the first that Hachi had saved her from. Hachi then turned red and told them that some things had happened, things that he wasn't proud of, though he didn't seem to want to talk about it. But in the end, he ended up finding out the source of the best sauce in the world for octopus balls. He had also ended up taking a lot of treasure that he stole from Macro's crew, thus earning a good deal of hatred from them. He sold off all the treasure though for cooking equipment and a cart, and helped out a town of starving catfish, at the cost of losing his chance to marry female octopus fishman by the name of Octopico. Well, he at least is a true chef, current Sanji admitted, no real chef would have left them to starve, even if it was for a lady. I still think that you were too good for her, Hachi, Kami said a little firmly, despite the fact that she was smiling. At the sight of it, the two women chuckled to themselves as they smiled at each other, seeing a little bit of jealousy in her words. But Kami didn't press the matter as Hachi nodded, and added that the catfish were so grateful to him for helping them that they built the ship as their way of saying thank you. And he added that it was thanks to all the encouragement that Kami gave him did he remember his original dream of opening up a stand like this one out here in the sea. After he got this ship, he told them that he promised himself that he had permanently given up being a pirate and planned to live out the rest of his days running this stand, with Kami and Papug helping out whenever they want. That sounds like such a nice dream, Present Robin commented. Well, I like it much better than him planning to go and break Arlong out of prison or something like that, Nami agreed. I think that he's truly found his calling here. Good for him, Chopper said with a big smile. They continued to watch them all eat and enjoy themselves for several more minutes before they heard a happy-go-lucky, somewhat annoying voice, calling out to them, hey. You guys. Young masters. Who's that? They heard past Zoro's voice ask from the ship. Those men from earlier, answered Memory Robin just as they looked over to see several people making their way towards them. Wait, don't leave without giving us the chance to thank you. Duval's voice called, and they could see him riding up on top of Motobaro, and his men all on their flying fish right behind him. They couldn't see his face at first since he was holding up a small hand mirror and seemed to be gazing lovingly at his own reflection. Who's that guy? Luffy asked, his cheeks still full and they were having a hard time understanding him. It's me, handsome, Duval announced. Whoops, I mean Duval. Yep, I created a new monster, current Sanji sighed with a shake of his head. And when he put his mirror down, they could see that his face was undoubtedly handsome. His entire facial structure was rearranged by Sanji's kick, completely different from the original, so that you'd never have guessed that this guy and the Duval from before were the same person. Couldn't you have made him less handsome or something? Usopp whispered to him and Sanji shrugged helplessly. How was I supposed to know that he'd turned into such an egomaniac? He asked. Well, you can't blame him for being happy over the result, Frankie pointed out. I mean, I guess he would have taken anything over that mess of a face. Luffy questioned, never once stopping himself from shoving octopus balls into his mouth. That what his face looked like before. I altered his bone structure, memory Sanji said next to him. He shouldn't have anything to complain about now, right? I almost prefer him when he was trying to kill us, present Nami sighed as Duval pulled right up next to them and thanked them so much for making him so handsome. He told them that he planned to go back to his peaceful life in the country, but couldn't leave without letting them know just how much he appreciated all they had done for him. He told them that if they needed anything from him, they were to just let him know. And he tried to wink at them, but his face contorted as if he didn't know how to wink before. Memory Sanji tried to tell them that as long as he was satisfied, that was all that mattered, but if they wanted to do them all a favor, then to just leave them alone. But Duval was still admiring himself in a mirror, and wasn't even listening to him. I know, current Sanji sighed tiredly to them all, suddenly wanting to go and collapse on his bed, and lit up another cigarette instead. I wish I could have done something about his brain, believe me. At that moment, Duval saw past Nami, who was wiping off some sauce from her lips with a napkin. Oh, my, said Duval as he looked away with a blush, and then he snapped his fingers before he pointed at her. It is somewhat embarrassing, but, I accept it. Your fair maiden's kiss. How the hell was that a kiss? Current Nami yelled out. He's just deluding himself. Current Sanji nodded, secretly glad that was the case. It's just wishful thinking. I wasn't doing anything like that. Past Nami snapped. I was just wiping my mouth, and what's with that ridiculously positive attitude of yours anyway? Mirror in my hand, Duval went on, clearly having not heard a word she said as he looked into the mirror. Am I the handsomest guy or what? You're only giving it one choice. The flying fish riders shouted in confusion. My god, Sanji, what did you do? Usopp whispered as Sanji shook his head helplessly. Memory Usopp spoke up, we get that you're handsome. But you're still an idiot. Thank you for stating the obvious, pal, current Frankie sighed as Duval gasped dramatically. But then he seemed to come to the wrong conclusion and said with a smirk, jealously. No way. Past Usopp spat at him, looking ready to start tearing him limb from limb, but Luffy was holding him back. Stop it, Usopp. Luffy warned him. You're no match for his craziness. Even Luffy says it, current Usopp whispered. Now we know that this guy's insane. At least that's over with, Sanji sighed as Duval held up a long slip of paper with a series of numbers on it. Well then, young master and friends, Duval started, tossing the paper down at them. Here's my transponder snail number. Feel free to call me anytime you like. I'll definitely help you out when that time comes. Duval attempted to wink again, but once more, it came out wrong. I really did cause you a lot of trouble, huh? I am really so, RRY. You think that maybe kicking him so hard like that made it hard for him to wink? Current Chopper asked curiously. Well, when else has he ever had a chance to wink and not make it look creepy? Frankie suggested. He's probably not used to it. Hell, I still say that it's creepy, Nami muttered as Luffy, Memory Sanji and Usopp all yelled out at him to stop winking already. See ya later, Duval said happily, and then he posed on top of Motobaro as he called to his men, Rosy Life Riders. They then followed right after him. Yes, handsome, they called, and soon enough they were out of their sights, and no one could say that they were sorry to see them gone. At least he's happy, Present Robin smiled. And that's half the battle in life, attitude. Too bad that his attitude is annoying no matter what, Zoro sighed. Once they were finally gone, their past selves went back to eating the octopus balls at a rate that could feed an entire army. At long last though, everyone had eaten their fill, and were contented to recovering from their meal while on the Sunny's deck. Luffy wasn't the only one who had stuffed himself however. Both Memory Usopp and Chopper were lying down with full, bloated stomachs, looking like they were about to slip off into a food coma. Kami began to clean the grill happily as Hachi and Papug were lying on the floor, exhausted and looked ready for a long nap. Hachi said that he was amazed at how much they could eat, and that he could have used 6 more arms. What do you call an octopus with 12 arms? Current Usopp asked. I rather not know, Nami muttered, thinking what Hachi would look like if he had that many arms, and shivered at the thought. Where would you put those extra limbs? Kami just smiled back at Hachi and told him that he did a great job and that everyone seemed to be satisfied. Really? Hachi asked, and there was a look of happiness in his face as he added, then I'm satisfied, too. What a kind octopus he has become, President Brooks said cheerfully as his past self was now burping and farting, and was being beaten up for his poor manners once again. Though I certainly hope that he didn't go bankrupt simply for feeding all of us here. Oh, I'm sure that he's fine, Nami laughed. He's a survivor. He escaped from a marine ship after all. If he could get through starting over from scratch after that, I think that he'll do just fine. Memory Sanji called them up to the sunny for a cup of tea, and to discuss what they were supposed to do next. Soon, they all climbed up, with Luffy still lying there, as round as a beach ball, and Memory Chopper was running tests to make sure that there wasn't anything to worry about. Memory Nami sat with Robin at the mast, with Brook bravely asking if he could see her panties, before he was beaten to a pulp. And as Zoro dozed off, everyone else was sitting at the table with cups of tea, and relaxing. As they sipped their tea, Kami had pulled out her map once more and was looking it over, trying to figure out where they were. This is the course we're going to take, she informed them. We're headed for the Sabayati archipelago. Oh boy, President Usopp sighed, not liking where they were heading from here as his past self asked in surprise that they couldn't get to Fishman Island without going there first. Deal with it, Zoro told their Usopp. There's nothing we can do about it now, we aren't who we were 2 years ago. Try and remember that. I know that, Usopp retorted, but still, doesn't mean I have to like it. He was scared. He wasn't sure if he was ready to watch that moment over again. And he was even more scared at the thought of being able to see that war once again. Did Luffy really head off to impel down on his own? If so, then how the hell did he get in? It took the entire Frankie family, some Galila foremen, a couple giant Yagaras, and the Rocketman just to make it through the front door of Eni's lobby after all. How'd that knucklehead do it on his own? That's right, Hachi replied. Fishmen and mermaids can just dive to get back. But you're humans. If you try to dive down there, the water pressure would kill you. That's for sure, Current Frankie nodded. Even the Shark Submerged 3 couldn't reach it. How are we gonna make it there? Alright, pay attention, Papug announced. It seems like you guys don't know anything. Well, that's nice of him, Current Nami muttered under her breath. How are we supposed to know how to get there if we've never been here before? Just grin and bear it, Nami-san, Brooke said happily, at least we know how to do it here now, don't we? So we can go back someday soon. And you'd just love that, wouldn't you? Robin asked him in amusement. Yo-ho-ho-ho, I can't say no to that, Robin-san, he said, and she could tell that he'd be smiling if he could. Papug was still speaking though, so they listened in. So I'll tell you a thing or two of these seas, he said before turned his back on them all. Huh, who is gonna do that? That would be me. And he turned back at them all with a pose, but no one was paying him any attention. I almost feel bad for the guy, Current Usopp said, but really, why does he do that? They all shrugged as he called loudly to get their attention. To start with, Papug said once they all turned to look at him. There are actually 2 routes you can take to get to the New World. But only one of them is accessible for outlaws, such as yourselves. Luffy, still completely full and looking ready to fall asleep, slowly raised his head and asked, why? Well, that's because one requires the world government's permission, Papug explained, for you to cross over the red line by going over the top, through the holy land of Mariajoy at its summit. Of course, there's no way a pirate would be allowed to pass through like that. Especially as, President Robin chuckled. After Eni's lobby and taking out a second warlord, something tells me that they wouldn't be thrilled to let us through. Geez, touchy aren't they? Current Sanji joked smugly. You mean just walking over the red line? Memory Chopper asked in amazement. Then what do we do about the ship? You'd have to leave it behind and get a new one on the other side, answered Papug. Memory Frankie, who had just taken a sip of tea spat it out as he yelled, leave the ship behind. Like hell I was gonna do that. Current Frankie said furiously. After all that he went through to build his masterpiece. Did they really think that he could just give her up and abandon her? He didn't care if he had to dig his way through the red line, he was going to find another way to get there even if it killed him. We never would have just left Sunny behind. Chopper chirped up in agreement. She's one of the crew. Here, Frankie cheered, posing once again. Yeah, Papug confessed, getting permission takes both time and money, but it's the safest way to get there. And naturally, we would chose the more dangerous route to get there. Current Nami smirked to herself as Memory Frankie looked as if someone had just ripped out his heart. However, Papug started, the passage you'll be taking will allow you get through with your ship and everything. That passage is known as the ocean floor route, which passes right by Fishman Island. But the ocean floor route is dangerous too, Kami interrupted, drawing attention away from the starfish, which caused him to sink into a kind of depression that they ignored. There are plenty of people who are eaten, along with their ships, by sea monsters and sea kings. Yeah, that trip was anything but fun, President Usopp nodded sagely as their past selves were really beginning to understand how dangerous this trip was going to be. With Memory Chopper and Usopp looking tense, sweat falling from their faces as they sipped their tea. I don't want to go to Fishman Island anymore, that Chopper said, his hooves shaking a little as he held onto his cup. Me neither, Usopp nodded, just as nervously, his eyes suddenly bloodshot. Just a minute, Kami, Memory Nami cut in. Did you just say, along with their ships? And when Kami confirmed it, she went on to ask, what kind of ship can we use to travel on the seafloor? This one, Kami answered, spreading her arms out to indicate the Sunny, and they stared at her, as if thinking that she was making this whole thing up. Hey now, this ship can't travel underwater, Past Frankie said seriously. Well, shows how much I knew, huh? The present one laughed. Well, Sunny's been to the bottom of the ocean, and someday she's gonna travel to the end of the Grand Line. Yeah, most of the rest of the cheered at that. Just you wait and see, Tom. Frankie went on, grinning so much that it felt like his face would tear. The Sunny is going to become a ship even you will be amazed by. No, it'll be alright, said Kami. You see, inside that huge wall encircling the world, the red line, there's a small hole in a certain spot. Although from our perspective it's a huge hole. And that's where Fishman Island is. Actually, it's right underneath the Holy Land, Mariajoy, said Hachi, turning to Nami and pointing downwards with all his arms. You just head 10,000 meters down and it's there. He makes it sound like we're going down the street to get milk or something, Present Zoro whispered to himself. Well, remember that for a fishman, it is a lot like that, Robin commented. They don't need a coating or a ship, they can easy outwit any monster that they find down there, so it is a simple matter for them. That far down? Memory Nami asked in a stunned voice. It's a really nice place, he told her eagerly, though still respectful of her, like he was afraid that he might mess up the fragile peace between them. Memory Nami sighed as she rested her cheek against her hand. Wasn't Sky Island about 10,000 meters up in the sky too? Funny how that works, Present Sanji sighed. Only now we're going the opposite way. Well, it certainly took a lot longer than riding the knock upstream, Brook reminded them as he thought of that great current. You were all there in a flash, weren't you? Not something that I would like to repeat, Chopper gulped, terrified at the thought of riding that thing again. What do you mean, we're gonna take this ship to the ocean floor? Past Frankie asked as he tilted his head, wondering if he was hearing them right. We're gonna get the ship coated at the island we're going to now. Kami answered excitedly. Coated? Frankie repeated questioningly. Kami smiled. You'll understand when we get there. You know, Current Nami sighed, I wish that we can get straight answers when we ask questions for a change. It's hard trying to pin everything together as we go along. But that's what makes it exciting, Brooke said happily to her. That's the true spirit of being a pirate. Yo-ho-ho-ho. They sat back on the Sunny, enjoying the ride and the occasional jokes and games that the others played as they passed the time. To be honest, none of them were looking forward to seeing Sabayati again. They all had wishes of seeing the island again when they were separated, but with the knowledge of what they were about to see was enough to make them all feel a little sick to their stomachs. But they signed up for all this, didn't they? Just had to live with it. And soon enough they could see the island in the distance. Once it was in their sights, their past selves gasped in wonder at all of it. The trees were so tall that they easily covered the entire sky so that it was almost impossible to see anything but the green branches. The trees resembled a little bit like candy canes, with their gray and white stripes going up the trunks. Each tree had a number on it, though no one paid much attention to them as they looked more at the darkness underneath the giant roots, which were easily bigger than even the Sunny. However, what everyone was most amazed by were the giant bubbles that filled the air, drifting about gently like someone was blowing soap bubbles in the bathtub. Welcome to the Sabayati archipelago, Papug declared as they marveled at every little piece of the island. As they watched the bubbles fly, they were all asking questions about this place and how any of this was possible. They then found out that the log pose wasn't reacting to the island, and it was Hachi who told them all about how the Sabayati archipelago wasn't actually an island, but rather a series of giant mangroves. He also added that there were a total of 79 trees and each one had its own town or facilities, and they were right in front of Grove 44 where the public entrance was. So they should all move a little farther back to avoid being seen. Hard to believe that so much happened here, Present Usopp said as he looked around at the bubbles, and wondered what would have happened if they never ran into those celestial dragons. What would have happened if they headed off for the New World in those 3 days like they had originally planned? Soon the ship arrived at Grove 41 with Luffy the first to disembark, naturally. Alright everyone, said Hachi, looking back to them all, don't forget the number here. Like I said earlier, all of the islands here are connected by bridges, so if you remember this number, you won't get lost. They weren't close enough to hear them, but Memory, Chopper and Usopp were looking back at Zoro, who grew annoyed at them and snapped what they were looking at. And here I thought that we had finally come to an island where it would be impossible for even Zoro to get lost on, Present Nami sighed dramatically. I see now how foolish I was. What the hell are you talking about? Zoro demanded. You told us that you thought that we were moored at Grove 1. She retorted. How was I supposed to know? He asked loudly, they must have painted the sign on the tree all wrong. Oh, sure, it was the tree's fault. Nami said sarcastically. Not the fact that you can't tell north from south. Nami, you're so cute when you're telling people off, Sanji sighed happily as the rest of them followed after Luffy, Kami, Papa, Hachi, and the memory straw hats of Robin, Chopper, and Usopp as they stepped onto land. As they did, however, they had just come across a bubble forming. "No way!" Luffy exclaimed as he poked the bubble excitedly. A bubble floated up from the ground. "That's funny." Memory, Chopper, and Usopp ran over to get a good look, but Luffy was already off, jumping up onto the bubbles and was heading up into the sky. Just what goes on inside that screwy little head of his, I wonder, to make him think that's a good idea, present Nami sighed as she watched him head higher and higher. The present-day Straw Hats patiently waited down below as Papug told them all about how the Urukiman mangroves secrete a special natural resin so that when the roots breathe, air inflates the resin and that's what makes the bubbles. "It really is amazing how this place works," Current Robin said wondrously. "It's hard to believe that this is all natural. And apparently it's because of the mangrove's roots that there's sunlight at Fishman Island," Nami reminded them. "And that those roots reach that far down in the first place alone is amazing if you ask me." "Well, seeing how high these trees are, I guess it's no real big surprise," Zoro shrugged. "Hey, guys," Luffy called from a bubble right above them, up so high now that they could barely see him. "I can see an amusement park over there. Let's go. Let's ride the Ferris wheel." Memory Chopper's eyes lit up at that. "An amusement park?" he asked excitedly. "That's Sabayati Park," said Kami longingly. "Ferris wheels look like so much fun. I've always dreamt of riding on that one. I can see why. That was really fun." Present-day Chopper laughed, and then he noticed something was wrong with Brook. "Brook, are you alright?" "Yes, Chopper-san," he said, and he sounded a little queasy. "I was just thinking about a couple of those rides there, not fun at all." "Your dream," Memory Chopper repeated as he looked at Kami. "Why can't you ride it?" "Don't be ridiculous. You can't do that, Kami," said Papug seriously, and she sighed in resignation. "I know," she groaned as Chopper was looking lost as to what the problem was. At that moment, Luffy came tumbling from the sky and landed on his head, thus getting it stuck once more. Kami freaked out at the sight of it, until they reassured her that he was fine, and he proved it by pulling his head out of the ground. "It's times like this that make him lucky to be made out of rubber," present Sanji sighed as Kami sighed in relief. Like fate had decided that from the start, Robin chuckled. "At the very least, we should be thankful that Shanks was irresponsible enough to lay that lying around where a little kid could find it." "By the way, Hachi," past Nami said, sounding friendly. "What exactly is our goal here? You said something about coding for the ship earlier, didn't you?" "Oh, yeah," said Hachi, gesturing to the bubbles that were hovering around them. "We have to go and find a coding mechanic and have him coat your ship with this resin. Simply put, that will allow your ship to travel underwater. I wonder if there's a place like this in the New World," Current Chopper said, thinking it all over, "so that people can come back out into this half again." "I'm sure there is," Frankie nodded. "A coating can only last for one journey. As soon as you resurface at Fishman Island it pops, and you have to get a new one while you're there, and it should last until you get back to the surface. Where there's a place to get a coating on this side of the Grand Line, I don't know. Not that we'll be needing it," Zoro shrugged, "'cause we're going all the way. Not much point if we turn back, right? That's the only way for humans to visit Fishman Island," Hachi continued. "However, if you get an amateur to do it, the ship and the humans riding it will be crushed by the water pressure. I know one mechanic who's trustworthy, so I'm gonna take you to him." "Octopus-san, you are such a nice fellow for helping us out so much," Memory Brook said as he looked to the rest of them and added, "Ah, he is a nice octopus. Yo-ho-ho-ho. He's certainly trying hard to help us out," present Sanji sighed in agreement. "Yeah, I guess he isn't so bad once you get to know him. I guess that meeting Kami-chan really changed him for the better, huh?" He then sighed lovingly as he thought of Kami and added, "And who could blame him?" Hachi held up 3 of his arms and started speaking again, only this time there was something very serious in his face. "In exchange, I'd like you to make just a single promise to me," he told them, no hint of joking in his tone, sounding more like a father warning his children not to break anything as they headed into a store that sold expensive and fragile things. "Sure," said Luffy agreeably. "What is it?" "Once we enter the city, we might run into the world nobles walking around there," he informed them all. "World nobles?" Memory Nami repeated in surprise. "Who are they?" asked Luffy. "Wish we never found out," Current Sanji whispered under his breath. "They're the citizens of the Holy Land, Mariajoy," Memory Robin answered. "And what about them?" Luffy asked cheerfully, but the smile faded when he saw the look on Hachi's face. It had turned very hard and his eyes were bloodshot as he said in a deadly serious voice, "No matter what might happen in the city, I want you to promise that you won't lay a hand on the world nobles." "I'm personally glad that Luffy didn't listen," Zoro sighed, wishing that he could have attacked those bastards when he had the chance. "I only wish that it was me who hit them, or sliced them." As they gave him worried looks at the sight of the evil grin he had at the idea of attacking those asshole nobles, their past selves seemed taken aback by the request. They knew why would Hachi make them promise not to do something to them? Thinking about it now, it was as if he knew exactly what was about to happen. Past Nami looked at him in confusion. No matter what, she repeated, sounding a little worried. What are you? Past Sanji began, but past Hachi went on speaking hurriedly, you got it. Even if someone were to be killed, right before your very eyes, just pretend you didn't see anything. No one dared to say anything as they stared at Hachi, and the memory faded around them as Luffy was looking at him with shock on his face. But Hachi's face had darkened, as if he was reliving an old nightmare from a long time ago. And the darkness returned around them just as they heard his voice echoing, I'll say it one more time. Just pretend you didn't see anything. Luffy and Ace. Luffy had finally collapsed to his knees, guessing having run round this entire island so that he could catch up to Ace. But now he was in a large field, and not having the slightest idea where his brother was. It was like they were both little kids again, and he had followed after Ace day after day for months before Ace would eventually leave him behind. Damn, he panted to himself, having run himself silly. Where'd Ace go? He's gotten fast alright. I couldn't ever find him, ow. While he had been talking to himself, someone had thrown a rock out of nowhere and hit him on the back of his head. Rubbing it, and cursing under his breath, he turned around to see Ace smiling there, throwing a small rock up and down in his hands. Hey, Luffy. Ace laughed, finally caught up of you. Ace, Luffy said, jumping up again. There you are. See, I told you that I could keep up with you. Ace only grinned back at him. About time, I thought I lost you back there, he told him as Luffy went racing at him. Let's see if you can fight as well as you can run. He yelled, a grin back on his face as Ace set fire to his arm and charged as well. Now, Ace didn't like the fact that he pushed Luffy's crew into seeing his little brother's memories without his permission. But he really wanted to believe that this was the right thing. Well, no matter how this ends, he thought to himself as Luffy threw his punch forward, at least I know that you'll be taken care of.